Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I woke up because someone said my name right outside the window. Not loud, not whispered either. Just normal. Like someone standing a few feet away speaking through the glass. Ethan. That's what I heard. Clear enough that I sat up immediately. My name's Ethan. I live in a small rented house just outside a village. Nothing remote, but quiet enough at night that you notice everything. My bedroom's on the ground floor, window facing the back garden. No street behind it, just a stretch of grass and a low fence, then fields. When I sat up, the room was still dark. My clock said 3:12 a.m. I stayed completely still, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement, no second voice. Just the usual silence you get out there at night. I waited a few seconds, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. Then I heard something else. A faint sound, like something brushing lightly across the outside wall. Not scratching, more like fabric dragging across brick. It lasted maybe a second, then stopped. I got out of bed slowly, didn't turn the light on. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was awake. I moved over to the window and stood just to the side of it. The curtain was pulled, but not fully tight. There was a small gap. I leaned slightly and looked through. The garden was empty, just the grass, slightly damp from earlier rain. The fence at the far end, nothing else. No one standing there, no movement. I stayed there for a bit, waiting. My eyes adjusted more. Still nothing. I opened the curtain a little wider, checked both directions, left toward the side of the house, right toward the fence. Empty. I remember feeling a bit stupid at that point, like I'd just woken up mid-dream or something. It happens, your brain mixes things up, but the voice had felt too clear, too close. I stood there another minute or so, then I noticed something in the grass, right below the window. At first I thought it was just a darker patch where it was wetter, but as I focused, it didn't look random. It had a shape. I leaned closer to the glass. It was an oval, a clean one. The grass was pressed down flat inside it, not torn up, not damaged, just flattened, like something had been resting there, perfectly still. I stared at it, trying to figure out what could have caused it. It was about the size of a small table, maybe a bit bigger, too large for something like a cat or fox, and too neat. There were no footprints leading to it, no marks around it, just that one flattened shape, directly under my window. I pulled back slightly, suddenly aware of how exposed I was standing there. The room felt different, quieter than before. I listened again. Nothing. No voice, no movement, just silence. I stayed up for a while after that, sat on the edge of the bed, watching the window, waiting to hear it again. Nothing happened. Eventually, I must have drifted off. I woke up again around 7. Sunlight coming through the curtains. Everything felt normal, almost enough that I questioned whether it had even happened, but I went straight to the window anyway, pulled the curtain back fully. The oval was still there, clearer in the daylight. The grass inside it was still pressed down, slightly darker than the rest, like it hadn't sprung back yet. I went outside, walked around to the back, stood right next to it. Up close, it looked even stranger. The edges were clean, not jagged or uneven, just a smooth oval. The grass wasn't broken, just bent, all in the same direction. I stepped around it carefully, looking for any other marks. Nothing. No footprints, no disturbed soil, no sign of anything moving through the area. Just that one shape, right beneath my window. I crouched down and touched the grass inside it. It was cold, colder than the rest around it. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. I stood there for a bit, trying to make sense of it. Could have been something heavy, I guess, but there was no indentation in the ground. Just the grass, and nothing that size could have been there without leaving some kind of trail. I went back inside eventually, made coffee, tried to carry on like normal, but I kept glancing out the window. The oval stayed there most of the day. By the evening, it had mostly lifted. Not completely, but enough that you wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. That night I closed the curtains properly. No gaps. Checked the window latch twice. Got into bed and lay there for a while. Listening. Everything was quiet, normal, no voices, no sounds outside. But I couldn't stop thinking about how clear it had been. The way it said my name. Not loud, not urgent, just like someone standing right there trying to get my attention. And how, when I looked, there was nothing there except that one spot in the grass, like something had been there long enough to leave a shape, and then just gone. Without ever making a sound I could actually follow or a step I could track. Just that single moment, right outside my window, where something knew my name, and I still don't know how. I noticed the radio first. It started as a low hum underneath the music. Not loud enough to be obvious, just enough that something felt off. My name's Lewis. I was driving back from visiting a friend out in the countryside through a long stretch of road that runs between farmland and low hills. It was late, around 1 a.m., and the fog had rolled in heavier than I expected. At first, it was just patches. Then it got thick. Proper thick. The kind where your headlights just bounce back at you and you can't see more than a few car lengths ahead. I slowed down to maybe 30, gripping the wheel a bit tighter than usual. The radio was playing fine up until then. Just some late-night station. Nothing special. Then that hum started. Low. Steady. Almost like interference. I reached out and adjusted the volume, thinking it was just the signal dropping out. But turning it down didn't get rid of it. The music got quieter. The hum stayed the same. I turned it all the way down. Silence. But the hum was still there. Faint, but present, like it wasn't coming from the speakers. I glanced at the dash. Everything normal. No warning lights. I tapped the radio off completely. The display went dark. The hum stayed. That's when I started paying attention. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a slow pulse, almost like a heartbeat. Low tone, slight dip, low tone again. I sat there listening to it, trying to figure out if it was coming from the engine, the tires, something mechanical. But it didn't match the movement of the car. Didn't change with speed, didn't shift when I adjusted anything, just that steady pulse. The fog ahead got thicker. The beams of my headlights barely cut through it now. Everything beyond maybe 10 feet was just white, flat, featureless. I slowed down even more, maybe 20. The hum grew slightly louder, or maybe I was just more aware of it. I rolled the window down a crack. Cold air rushed in. The hum didn't change. If anything, it felt more present, like it was in the air. I looked at the road ahead, still nothing but fog. Then slowly the color of it changed. Not all of it, just a section directly in front of me. It started to glow, very faint, a pale white, different from the usual reflection of headlights. This was softer, more even, and it didn't shift when I moved. It stayed fixed in that patch ahead. I eased off the accelerator completely. The car rolled forward slowly. The hum matched the pace somehow. Still steady, but it felt closer. The glowing patch grew larger as I approached, and then I realized I could see something inside it. Not clearly, just a darker area within the glow. A shape. I squinted, leaning forward slightly. The shape didn't move. It stayed suspended in that fog, high above the road. At first I thought it was a tree or something tall, but the outline was wrong. Too smooth, too wide. It stretched across the road and beyond it, disappearing into the fog on both sides, like a ceiling hanging over me. I slowed to a near stop. The hum was louder now, still that same pulse. The glow in the fog made the edges of the shape slightly more visible. It wasn't solid in the way a building or a bridge would be. It was just darker than the fog. A huge curved surface, hanging there. I didn't see any lights on it. No detail, just that mass, perfectly still. I sat there, engine idling, staring at it, trying to make sense of it. There was no reason for anything like that to be there. No structures in that area, no overhead lines, nothing. The road was supposed to be completely open. The hum dipped slightly, then rose again. That pulse. I felt it in my chest more than I heard it now. I didn't move, didn't know whether to reverse or keep going. The shape didn't react, didn't shift, just stayed there above the road. I looked at the edges, trying to see where it ended. I couldn't. It just faded into the fog, like it was too large to fully see. The glow around it stayed consistent, not coming from it, but revealing it. I checked my mirrors quickly. Nothing behind me, just more fog. I looked forward again. The shape was still there, exactly the same. Then without warning, the fog disappeared. Not gradually, not thinning, just gone. Like someone had wiped it away. The road ahead was clear, open, no glow, no shape, nothing above me, just empty night sky. The stars were visible again. The road stretched out like normal. The hum stopped at the same time. Instantly. No fade. Just silence. I sat there for a few seconds, engine still running, hands still on the wheel, trying to process what had just happened. I looked up through the windshield. There was nothing there. No sign anything had been above me. No outline. No movement. Just sky. I checked the radio. Turned it back on. Music came through normally. No hum. No interference. Everything sounded exactly like it should. I drove the rest of the way home slower than usual. Kept checking the sky. Kept listening for that sound. It didn't come back. But the part that stuck with me wasn't just the shape, it was how the fog revealed it. Like it wasn't something emitting light, just something massive sitting there, hidden, only visible when the conditions were right. And how the moment it was gone, everything returned to normal, like it had never been there at all. I started noticing it the fourth morning in a row. My name's Darren. I fish off a small stretch of coastline about 20 minutes from where I live. Nothing fancy, just a rocky edge with a narrow strip of sand and a decent drop-off not too far out. I go early before sunrise because it's quiet, and you actually have a chance of catching something before the day crowds show up. That week, I'd been getting there around 5 a.m. Still dark, cold air coming off the water. Just me, the tide, and whatever you can hear in the distance. The first few mornings were normal. Then on the fourth, I saw the light, out over the water. Low, not high in the sky like a plane, closer to the horizon, bright, but not blinding, white with a slight yellow tint. I remember thinking it was a boat at first, but it didn't move, and it didn't flicker like a boat light would, just a steady glow. I kept setting up my gear, glancing up at it every now and then, and it stayed in the same place the whole time. Didn't drift, didn't change brightness, didn't do anything. Eventually, as the sky started to lighten, it faded out, or maybe it just became harder to see against the daylight. I didn't think much of it. Next morning, it was there again. Same position, same brightness, same everything. That's when I started paying attention. I got there a bit earlier the third time, still dark. The light was already there, exactly where I expected it to be. I stood there for a minute before even unpacking anything, just watching it, trying to figure out distance. But there was no reference point, just open water, no other boats nearby, no sounds. The sea was calm that morning, small, slow waves, nothing unusual except that light. I checked my phone, 052, looked back up, still there. I set up my rod, cast out, and kept watching it between everything else. It never changed, didn't blink, didn't dim, just hung there. By the time the sky started getting lighter, it faded again, same as before. I went home, still not really sure what I'd seen. Fourth morning, I decided to focus on it properly. Got there earlier than usual, maybe 4:45. Pitch dark. The light was already there, same place, like it had been waiting. I didn't even bother setting up straight away. Just stood there, hands in my pockets, watching it. The air felt still, no wind, the water barely moving. I noticed something else then, the sound, or lack of it. Usually you hear something, waves, distant birds, even the faint hum of something far out. That morning it felt quieter, not completely silent, just reduced, like the background noise had dropped. I stepped closer to the edge of the water. The light stayed fixed. I squinted, trying to see if there was any shape around it. There wasn't, just the light, no outline, no beam, nothing connecting it to anything. I checked the time again, 04:53. I stood there for a few more minutes, watching, waiting. Then it moved. Not fast, slow, almost unnoticeable at first. It started descending, straight down, no sideways drift, no wobble, just a steady drop toward the water. I felt my chest tighten a bit. I took a step forward without thinking. The light kept descending, same brightness, same color, no change in intensity. It got closer to the surface. I expected some reflection, some ripple, anything. There was none. The water stayed the same, dark, flat. The light reached the surface, and then it kept going, straight into the water. No splash, no ripple, no disturbance at all. It didn't even distort, just passed through the surface like it wasn't there. I stood there, staring at the spot where it disappeared, waiting for something to happen. A wave, a sound, anything. Nothing. The water remained completely normal, small waves moving in, just like before. I took a few steps along the shoreline, trying to see if maybe it had moved or reappeared somewhere else. It hadn't. The spot where it went under looked no different from anywhere else. I stood there for a long time, longer than I realized. Watching the water, waiting. Eventually the sky started to lighten. The usual sounds came back. Distant birds, the low rush of the tide. Everything felt normal again. I went home after that. Didn't stay to fish. The next morning I went back. Same time, same place. The light was there again. Exactly where it had been before. Hovering over the water, like nothing had happened. I stood there watching it, knowing what it was going to do. And when it started descending again, slow, steady, I found myself stepping back instead of forward. Watching it go under the surface again, without a sound, without a ripple, like the ocean wasn't really there, or like whatever it was moving through something else entirely. And we just happened to see the part right before it disappeared. I noticed the temperature drop before I saw anything. My name's Aaron. I was driving alone through a stretch of desert highway in southern Nevada, heading back from a job out near Tonopah. It's the kind of road where you can go 20, 30 minutes without seeing another car. Just straight asphalt, sand on both sides, and nothing else. It was late. Around 1 a.m., still warm even at night. My dash was reading 27 degrees Celsius when I last looked. I had the windows cracked slightly, radio on low, just trying to stay alert. There wasn't much to look at except the road and the occasional reflective marker catching the headlights. I checked the temperature again without really thinking. 27, normal. I drove maybe another mile, then it dropped, fast. 27, 23, 19, 15. I remember watching the numbers change in real time like something was glitching. It settled at 12 degrees Celsius. I blinked, looked up at the road, then back down. Still 12. I rolled the window down a bit more. The air felt cooler, not freezing, but definitely colder than it had been seconds before. Too sudden to make sense. I adjusted the vents, thinking maybe the sensor was off, but the air coming in matched the reading. Cooler, dry, almost still. I slowed down slightly. The road ahead looked the same, flat, empty. Then I saw the lights. At first I thought they were reflections, maybe distant headlights from another vehicle cresting a hill. But they didn't move like headlights, they were low, close to the ground, and there were too many of them. A cluster, soft white, maybe 5 or 6 points grouped together just above the road surface. They hovered. That's the only way I can describe it. Not touching the ground. Not casting any light onto it either, just sitting there a few inches or maybe a foot above the asphalt. I took my foot off the accelerator. The car slowed to about 40. The lights didn't react. Didn't move toward me, didn't fade. They just stayed there, perfectly still. I remember thinking maybe it was some kind of reflection from my own headlights, but they were too far ahead, and the angles didn't make sense. I kept rolling forward, slow, careful. The temperature reading stayed at 12, didn't budge. The closer I got, the clearer the lights became. They weren't bright, more like a dull glow. Each one slightly different in intensity, not blinking, not flickering. Just steady. I looked around, trying to see if there was anything else, any source. A vehicle parked off the road, a structure. Nothing. Just sand and darkness. I was maybe 50 yards away when something changed. One of the lights shifted slightly. Not much, just a small movement upward. Then another followed, then all of them, in sync. They lifted together, slow at first like they were rising through thick air. I pressed the brake lightly. The car rolled to a near stop. I didn't want to get closer, didn't feel right. The lights reached maybe 10 or 15 feet above the road. Then they paused, held there for a second, completely silent. No sound from them, no change in the air. Just that cluster suspended in front of me. Then they moved, not forward, not backward, up, straight up, and fast. They shot upward all at once like something had pulled them. No trail, no fade, just gone, vanished into the dark sky. I sat there for a second, staring at where they'd been. The road ahead was empty again. Nothing left. No afterimage, no glow. Just darkness and the faint reflection of my headlights. I checked the temperature again. Still 12. I waited a few seconds. Then it started climbing. Slowly this time. 13, 15, 18, back up to 27 over the next minute or so. The air warmed with it. Like whatever had caused the drop was gone. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing behind me. No lights. No movement. Just the empty stretch of road. I stayed stopped longer than I probably should have. Engine idling, hands still on the wheel. Trying to figure out what I'd just seen. Nothing came to mind. Nothing that made sense. Eventually, I started driving again, slow at first, then back up to speed. The rest of the drive was normal. No more lights, no more temperature changes, just the road and the silence. But the part that stuck with me wasn't just the lights. It was how the air changed before they appeared, how the temperature dropped so fast, like something had moved into that space and altered it, and how the lights didn't behave like anything I'd seen before. Not vehicles, not reflections, just there, hovering, waiting, until they left and everything went back to normal. Like that stretch of road had only been different for those few seconds while they were there. I saw it later, not while I was out there. My name's Lewis. I was out on the edge of a reservoir just before a storm rolled in. I go out there sometimes to take photos, nothing serious, just a hobby. That evening, the sky looked good for it. Low clouds building, flashes of lightning in the distance, that kind of slow, heavy weather you can see coming for a while. It was around dusk, still light, but the sky had that darker tone already. Wind picking up just enough to move the surface of the water in long ripples. I set up near a small concrete barrier by the path. Tripod, camera, usual stuff. There wasn't anyone else around. It's quiet out there even on a normal day, and storms tend to keep people away. I took a few test shots first. Just the horizon, some trees, the water. Everything looked normal. Then the lightning started getting closer. Not constant, just every so often. A flash behind the clouds, lighting them up from inside. I switched to longer exposures, trying to catch it. That meant standing still, waiting, hitting the shutter, waiting again. It's slow, but you get used to it. After a while, I noticed something off, but I didn't register it properly at the time. The clouds above me were moving, but not evenly. Most of them were drifting in from the west, slow and steady. But every now and then, there was a section that didn't match, a patch that seemed slower or heavier. I remember thinking it was just layers moving at different speeds. Normal weather stuff. I kept shooting. Click. Wait. Click again. A few flashes came through, lighting up the sky enough to show the shapes of the clouds. Nothing unusual, at least nothing I noticed. Then there was one flash that felt stronger than the others. Not brighter exactly, just sharper. It lit the clouds from behind in a way that gave them more definition. I took a photo right as it happened. Didn't think anything of it. Just part of the sequence. After that, the storm shifted slightly. The flashes got more distant again. Wind picked up a bit more. I packed up after another 10 minutes or so. Headed back to the car, drove home. The whole thing felt like a normal evening. I didn't even think about it again until I got home and started going through the photos. I always check them on my laptop. Bigger screen, easier to see details. The first few looked fine. Clouds, lightning in the distance, water reflections. Then I got to that one shot, the one taken during that sharper flash. At first glance, it looked normal too. Clouds lit up from behind, some darker sections in front. Then I noticed the shape. It wasn't obvious. Not at first. It was darker than the surrounding cloud, but not like a shadow. More solid. I zoomed in. That's when I saw the outline. Triangular, not perfectly sharp, but defined enough that it didn't match anything else in the sky. It sat behind the clouds, or within them. Hard to tell. The edges were straight, too straight, and the shape was large, bigger than anything you'd expect from a cloud formation. It didn't glow, didn't reflect light. Just sat there, darker than everything around it. I stared at it for a while, trying to figure out what I was looking at. Then I checked the photos before it. Same area of sky. Nothing there, just clouds. No shape, no darkness. I checked the next photo after it. Again, nothing. The clouds had shifted slightly, but no triangle, no outline, just normal sky. I went back to the image again, zoomed in further. The shape was still there, unmistakable once you saw it. I tried adjusting the brightness and contrast, didn't make it go away. If anything, it became clearer. 3 edges, meeting at 3 points. Not perfectly equilateral, but close enough to look intentional. I checked the timestamp. It matched the moment I remembered that stronger flash. I sat back and thought about it. Tried to remember if I'd seen anything at the time, anything at all. But I hadn't. I would have noticed something like that. Something that large. That defined. But I didn't. It only showed up in that one frame. I went back through the rest of the photos again. Carefully, one by one. Nothing. No hint of it before or after. Just that single moment. I even checked the sky again the next day. Went back out there in the morning, clear sky, no clouds, nothing unusual, same view, same place, just normal. I still have the image saved. I've looked at it more times than I probably should, trying to see if it's just something in the clouds that my brain is turning into a shape, but it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't shift or change the way cloud patterns usually do when you stare at them. It stays the same, fixed, like it was there just for that second. Hidden enough that you couldn't see it with your eyes, but caught when the light hit it just right. And the part I keep coming back to is that I was standing there the whole time, looking at that exact section of sky, waiting for lightning, watching the clouds move, and whatever that was, it was there long enough to be captured clearly, but not long enough or not visible enough for me to notice it at all until I got home and saw it sitting there in a single frame with nothing like it anywhere else. I noticed it because the insects stopped all at once. My name's Callum. I'd gone out camping alone in a patch of forest up in Northumberland, a place I'd been to a few times before. It's not an official campsite, just a quiet clearing off a trail that most people don't bother with. That night had been normal, cool, dry, no wind. The kind of night where the forest never really goes silent, just layers of sound. Crickets, little rustling noises, occasional distant movement you don't think too much about. I'd set up my tent, made a small fire earlier, then let it burn down to embers before heading inside. I remember checking the time, just after 1 a.m. before settling in. I wasn't asleep yet, just lying there, listening. That's when everything stopped. Not gradually, not fading, just cut out. Every insect, every background noise, gone in the same instant. It was so sudden it didn't even register as silence at first. It felt more like something had been switched off. I stayed still, staring up at the inside of the tent, waiting, expecting the sounds to come back. They didn't. The air felt different, still but heavier somehow, like the space around me had changed. I sat up slowly, unzipped the tent just enough to look out. The clearing was dark, but my eyes had adjusted enough to make out shapes, the trees, the ground, the faint outline of where the fire had been. Everything looked normal. But it didn't feel normal. The silence was too complete. No wind through the leaves, no distant noise, nothing. I pushed the flap open a bit more and leaned out. That's when I saw the light. It was between the trees, maybe 20 or 30 feet away. At first I thought it was someone else, another camper with a torch, but it didn't move, and it didn't look like a beam. It was just there, a bright white shape, suspended in the space between two tree trunks, not touching the ground. Not attached to anything, just hanging there. I watched it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. The brightness was strange. It wasn't harsh, didn't hurt to look at, but it was intense, clean, like a solid presence more than a source of light. Then I noticed something else. It wasn't lighting up the trees around it. The branches, the ground, the trunks, none of them were illuminated the way they should have been. If anything, they looked darker. Like the light wasn't spreading outward, it was pulling the darkness in. The space around it looked thinner, less defined. I leaned a bit further out of the tent, squinting, trying to see the edges. There weren't any clear ones. The shape was roughly oval, but the boundary wasn't sharp, more like a transition from normal darkness into something else. I felt that pressure in my ears, same kind you get when altitude changes. I swallowed. It didn't help. The silence stayed. The light didn't flicker, didn't move. It just hung there. I stayed completely still, didn't want to make noise, didn't want to draw attention, even though I didn't know if that made any sense. After a few seconds, I noticed something shifting. Not the light itself, the space around it. The darkness seemed to deepen as it got closer, like it was pulling it in. The trees nearest it looked almost flat, like silhouettes instead of solid objects. I blinked a few times, trying to clear my eyes, but it didn't change. The light felt closer now, even though I hadn't moved. Or maybe it had moved. I couldn't tell. There was no reference point that made sense anymore. The forest didn't look the way it had before. Depth felt off. Distance felt off. I slowly pulled back into the tent. Didn't take my eyes off it. My hand brushed against the zipper, making a faint sound. It felt too loud, too out of place. The light didn't react, didn't shift, didn't flicker. It just stayed there. Then, without warning, it changed. not in brightness, in presence. It felt like it thinned, like it was collapsing inward. The shape shrank slightly, not physically, but something about it became less defined. And then it was gone. No fade, no movement, just gone. The space where it had been looked normal again. Trees, shadows, darkness. The insects came back a second later, all at once, like someone flipped the switch back on. Crickets, rustling, distant movement, everything. I sat there in the tent, still half crouched, listening. The pressure in my ears eased, the air felt normal again. I didn't move for a long time, just stayed there, staring at the spot between the trees. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I zipped the tent fully closed, lay back down. But I didn't sleep, just listened to the forest like I was hearing it for the first time. The next morning, I went over to where the light had been. There was nothing there. No marks on the ground, no broken branches, nothing unusual at all. Just the same patch of forest I'd seen the night before. But the part that stayed with me wasn't just the light. It was how it didn't behave like light, how it didn't spread, didn't illuminate, just existed, and seemed to pull everything else inward toward it, including the sound, until for those few seconds, there was nothing else in that space, except that, and me watching it, without understanding what I was looking at. I stepped outside because it was too bright for the time. My name's Marcus. I usually wake up early for work, around 5 a.m., and I'll step out onto the back patio for a minute before getting ready. It's quiet then, still dark most days, depending on the season. That morning, something felt off right away. The sky wasn't fully dark, but it wasn't sunrise either. There was light, but it wasn't spread across the horizon like it should be. It was concentrated. I walked out onto the patio and stopped. Directly ahead, past the back fence and over the line of trees, there was a column of light. A narrow vertical strip, brighter than anything else in the sky. It stretched from just above the horizon upward into the clouds. Not wide. Maybe the width of a building if you tried to compare it at that distance. But it stood out immediately because everything else was still dark. The rest of the horizon was flat and dim, no gradual glow. No color change, just that one section. I leaned on the railing, staring at it. At first, I thought it might be some kind of reflection, maybe headlights or something catching low clouds. But it was too high, too consistent, and it didn't flicker or move. It just stayed there. A solid, pale light. I checked my watch, 4:58. Too early for sunrise, and even if it wasn't, it doesn't happen like that, not in a straight line like that. I stood there for a minute or so, trying to figure it out. The air was still, no wind, no sound except a few distant birds starting up. Normal, early morning stuff. But that light didn't match any of it. It didn't feel connected to the rest of the sky. It felt separate, like it was its own thing. I noticed something else after a bit. The edges of it weren't sharp, they kind of blurred into the darkness. But the center was brighter, almost white. Not yellow like sunrise, not orange, just white. Cold looking. I took a few steps forward, closer to the fence. Like that would somehow change what I was seeing. It didn't. The column stayed exactly where it was. Didn't shift. Didn't widen. Just vertical. Perfectly straight. Then I realized it wasn't staying the same. It was changing. Just slowly. The bottom part of it, the part closest to the horizon, started to dim slightly. At first, I thought my eyes were adjusting, but it kept happening. The light at the base faded. Not quickly. Just gradually. While the upper part stayed the same. I frowned, trying to track it. The lower edge of the light moved upward, like someone was pulling it up from the bottom. The horizon beneath it went dark again, normal dark, as if the light had never been there. I stood there, watching. The column got shorter. The base kept rising. The top stayed in place for a few seconds longer. Then it started moving too, upward. The whole thing was retracting, not spreading, not fading outward, just pulling straight up into the sky. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, like when you're driving up a hill too fast. I swallowed. Didn't fully go away. The air felt heavier for a moment. I didn't move, didn't want to look away. The light kept retracting, smooth, steady, no flickering, no change in brightness, just less of it visible as it moved higher, until it was no longer connected to the horizon at all. Now, it was just a shorter vertical streak higher up. Then even that started to shrink. The top edge moved up faster than before. The entire column compressed into a smaller shape, then smaller still, until it was just a bright point, suspended in the sky. For a second, it stayed there, perfectly still. Then it vanished. No fade, no flash, just gone. The sky returned to normal, dark, flat, the kind of early morning darkness you expect. I stood there for a while, waiting, half expecting something else to happen. Nothing did. The birds kept going. A car passed somewhere in the distance. Everything sounded normal again. A few minutes later, the actual sunrise started. Slow, gradual, spreading evenly across the horizon, exactly how it's supposed to look. I went inside eventually, made coffee, tried not to think too much about it, but the part that stuck with me wasn't just how the light looked, it was how it behaved, how it didn't spread or glow outward like any normal light source, how it seemed contained, controlled, and then pulled back, straight up, like it was being removed from that exact spot, leaving the sky exactly the way it had been, as if that column of light had never belonged there in the first place. I was already stopped at the crossing when the car shut off. My name's Darren. I was driving back from a late shift, same route I'd taken for years. There's a train crossing just outside a small industrial area, no rear arms, just the lights and the warning signal when something's coming through. It was around 12:50 a.m., no other cars around. The crossing lights weren't active when I pulled up, but I stopped anyway out of habit. I always do. It's a long, straight stretch, and you can see pretty far down the tracks. I sat there for a second, engine idling, just looking left and right. Nothing. No train lights, no sound. Just quiet. I checked my phone quickly, then set it back down. That's when the crossing lights flickered on. No warning, just straight into it. Red lights flashing, steady rhythm. The bell didn't start though. That was the first thing I noticed. Usually, the bell kicks in at the same time, but this time it was just the lights. No sound. I leaned forward a bit, looking down the tracks again. Still nothing, no train, no headlights in the distance. I figured maybe it was coming from further out, just hadn't reached the visible stretch yet. So I waited. A few seconds passed, still nothing. Then the car died. Everything at once, engine cut out, dash went black, radio off. Even the faint hum from the vents stopped. It wasn't like stalling, it just stopped completely. I sat there for a second, hands still on the wheel. The crossing lights kept flashing, bright red, reflecting off the hood. But inside the car, nothing worked. I turned the key instinctively. No response, not even a click. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. No bell, no engine, no wind, nothing. I could hear my own breathing. I looked back at the crossing, lights still going, but no sound at all. It felt wrong, like something was missing from the moment. I opened the door slightly, stepped 1 foot out onto the road. The air felt not cold, just empty. I don't know how else to describe it. I looked up without really thinking, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a darker patch of sky. The night was clear enough to see stars, even with the faint glow from the industrial area behind me. But above the crossing, there was a shape, darker than the rest of the sky. It moved slowly, not fast, just steady. And as it passed, the stars behind it disappeared. Not dimmed, not distorted, gone, like something solid was blocking them. The shape didn't have lights, didn't reflect anything. Just a smooth outline, barely visible unless you were watching the stars. I stepped fully out of the car, didn't even close the door. Just stood there, looking up. It was big, larger than anything I'd expect to see that low. But it didn't feel low. Hard to judge distance. It could have been much higher than it looked. The edges weren't sharp, more like a clean, continuous curve. No angles, no details, just a single smooth surface moving across the sky, completely silent. The crossing lights kept flashing behind me. Red, red, red. But there was still no bell. The shape moved directly over the tracks, over me. I didn't move, didn't think to. Just watched it pass. The stars vanished behind it, then reappeared once it moved on. Like nothing had been there. I felt a pressure in my ears, a light one. Like the start of a change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't go away. The air felt heavier again. Like earlier, just slightly. The shape kept moving. Same speed, same direction. No change. Then it reached the other side of the crossing and just kept going. No acceleration, no fade. Just continued out of view. Once it was gone, the stars looked normal again. The sky looked empty. I stood there for a few seconds longer, just staring at where it had been. Then everything came back. At once. The car lights flickered on. The dash lit up. The engine made a small sound like it was trying to start. The crossing bell finally kicked in. Loud, sharp, jarring after the silence. I flinched, stepped back, got into the car quickly, turned the key. It started immediately, like nothing had happened. I looked down the tracks again. Still no train. The lights kept flashing, the bell ringing, but there was nothing coming. After maybe 20 seconds, the lights stopped. The bell cut out, everything went quiet again, no train ever passed. I sat there for a while, engine running, hands still on the wheel, the road was empty. The crossing was inactive again, just like when I'd first pulled up. I drove off eventually, didn't look back. The rest of the drive home was normal, but the part I can't shake isn't just what I saw overhead, it's how everything else stopped at the same time. Like the car, the crossing, the sound, all of it paused. Just long enough for that shape to pass over, and then picked back up again, like nothing had interrupted it at all. I noticed it because the fan stopped. My name's Jake. I was lying in bed, not asleep, just scrolling through my phone with the lights off. It was late, around 2:40 a.m. I remember checking the time a few minutes before everything happened. The ceiling fan was on low, just enough to move the air. I always keep it on at night. You get used to the sound after a while, then it cut out, not gradually, just stopped. At the exact same moment, my phone screen went black. No fade, no dimming, just off. The little charging light by the outlet disappeared too. Everything in the room shut off at once. Complete darkness. It took me a second to even process it. I tapped my phone, expecting the screen to come back. Nothing. No response. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. Not just the fan being gone. Everything. No hum from the charger, no faint electrical noise you don't normally notice, just silence. And then I heard the clicking. Faint, soft, above me. At first I thought it was something outside, like a branch or something tapping the roof. But it wasn't random, it had a pattern. Click, pause, click, click, longer pause, click. It was moving. That's what made me sit up. The sound wasn't staying in one place, it was shifting across the ceiling, slowly. Like something small moving overhead, inside the room. I stayed completely still, listening. The clicks were quiet but clear enough in the silence. They started near the corner above my head, then moved toward the center. Each step or movement marked by that same faint sound. Click, pause, click, click. I looked up, even though I couldn't see anything. The ceiling was just a darker shape in the dark. No light coming from outside either. My curtains were closed. The air felt different. Hard to explain. Not colder exactly, just still, like the room had been sealed off somehow. The clicking stopped for a moment, then started again, slightly further across. I pulled my blanket down a bit, trying to get a better view. Not that it helped. Still, nothing visible. I held my breath, listening carefully. The sound changed slightly, less like a tap, more like something making contact with a hard surface. Precise, deliberate. Not random noise, it moved directly above me. I could feel my chest tightening, but I didn't move. Didn't want to draw attention to myself. The clicking paused again, longer this time, then resumed, moving toward the other side of the room. I turned my head slightly, following the sound. Still nothing to see, just darkness. I remember thinking maybe it was something in the attic, but the way the sound carried didn't match that. It felt closer, too close. Like it was right on the ceiling, not above it. Then everything turned back on, at once. The fan spun up again. The charger light blinked back. My phone screen lit up in my hand. The sudden light made me blink. I looked up immediately. The ceiling was empty. Nothing there, no movement, no shadow, no sign anything had been there at all. The clicking stopped the second the power came back, like it had never happened. I checked my phone. 2:43. 3 minutes had passed. Or at least, that's what it said. It didn't feel like that long. I sat there for a while, just looking around the room. Everything was normal again. The fan running, the usual background noise back. I got out of bed eventually and checked the rest of the house. Lights worked. No signs of a power cut anywhere else. The clock in the kitchen hadn't reset. Nothing. Just my room. I went back and lay down again. Kept the light on this time. Didn't sleep. Just listened. Nothing else happened. But the part that stuck with me wasn't just the clicking. It was how everything shut off at the same time. And how the sound only started once it was completely dark. and stopped the second the power came back, like whatever was moving across the ceiling needed that silence or that absence to be there at all. And the moment the room went back to normal, it was just gone. I woke up because the alarm wouldn't stop. It wasn't the main house alarm, just the motion sensor we had set up in the backyard. It was supposed to ping my phone once if something moved back there, usually just a cat or the neighbor's dog getting through the fence. That night it kept going off, one notification after another, every few seconds. My name's Callum. I live in a detached place with a small fenced garden out back. Nothing big, just a patch of grass, a shed, and a motion camera mounted under the gutter pointing straight across the lawn. I grabbed my phone off the bedside table. 16 notifications in a row, all from the same sensor. I sat up, still half asleep, trying to process it. Usually it triggers once, maybe twice if something lingers. This was constant. I opened the app and checked the live feed. The backyard looked normal, dark, lit only by the weak security light over the door. The grass looked still. No movement. I stared at it for a few seconds. Nothing changed. Another notification came through while I was watching. The sensor triggered again, but the feed didn't show anything moving. I frowned, leaned closer to the screen. Still nothing. I scrolled back to the recorded clips. The app saves short recordings every time the sensor goes off. I tapped the most recent one. The clip loaded. At first it looked normal, empty yard. Then I noticed the grass, right in the middle. It was bending, not like wind, not random. It was moving in a circle, a clean, almost perfect circle, maybe 6 or 7 feet across. The blades of grass were all pressed down at once, forming a ring. Then they lifted, slowly, like whatever had pushed them down was gone. The clip ended. I watched it again. Same thing. No shadow, no shape, just the grass reacting to something that wasn't there. I felt more awake now. I checked the next clip. Same spot, same movement. The circle formed again, grass flattening outward, then rising back up. No sound in the recording. No visible cause. Just that motion. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The alarm pinged again. Another clip saved. I didn't open it yet. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. The backyard looked exactly like it did on the feed. Still, empty. I couldn't see the grass moving from that angle. I stayed there for a moment, watching. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed again. I opened the newest clip. This one was different. The circle formed faster, more sudden. The grass pressed down sharply, like something had landed hard, then held, for a second longer than before, then lifted. I noticed something else. The center of the circle didn't move, just the outer ring, like the pressure was distributed around the edge. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Wind didn't do that. Animals didn't either. And there was nothing there. I went downstairs, didn't turn the lights on, just moved through the house quietly. I'm not sure why. Maybe I didn't want whatever was out there to know I was watching. I reached the back door and stood there for a second, hand on the handle, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, just silence. I unlocked the door and opened it slowly. The cold air hit me right away. Still no wind. I stepped out onto the patio. The security light flicked on above me. The yard looked normal. Grass standing upright. No visible marks. I took a few steps forward. My shoes made a soft sound against the concrete, then the grass. I stopped near the edge of where I'd seen the circle in the footage. I looked down. Nothing, just grass. Slightly damp from the night air. I crouched and ran my hand over it. It felt normal. No flattened areas, no indentation. I stood back up and looked around. The fence line. The shed. Nothing out of place. I checked the sky. Cloudy. No stars visible. Just a dull gray ceiling. My phone buzzed again. Another alert. I opened the clip while still standing out there. The camera angle showed the yard from above, and there I was, standing just off to the side. But the circle was forming right behind me. The grass bent down in that same perfect ring. While I stood there, not reacting, I turned around immediately. The grass behind me was still. No movement. No sound. I looked back at the clip. The circle had already faded, the grass rising again. But I hadn't seen it happen. I was right there. I should have seen it. I played it again. Watched my own back in the frame, standing still. And just a few feet behind me, the grass bending like something had pressed down. I didn't feel anything. No vibration, no shift in the ground, nothing. I backed up slowly toward the house, kept my eyes on the yard. Nothing moved. I stepped onto the patio and went back inside. Locked the door. Checked the feed again. Another clip had been recorded. This time the circle formed closer to the shed. Same pattern, same size, same motion. I sat at the kitchen table and kept watching. The alerts slowed down after a while, then stopped completely. The last clip showed the circle forming one more time. Then nothing. The grass stayed still after that. No more movement, no more triggers. I stayed up until morning. Didn't go back to bed. When it got light out, I went back into the yard. Walked straight to where the circles had been. Nothing. No marks, no flattened patches, no sign anything had happened. But the part that stuck with me wasn't just the movement, it was how precise it was. How clean the circle formed every time. And how it happened right behind me, without any sound or feeling like whatever was there was interacting with the ground, without touching anything else. And somehow, I couldn't even tell it was happening, even when I was standing right next to it. I noticed the first light go dim near the far end of the lot. My name's Kieran. I worked overnight security at a distribution warehouse just outside town. It wasn't a big operation, just a long rectangular building, loading bays on one side, a wide open car park in front, and a row of tall lights spaced evenly across it. My shift was usually quiet. Walk the perimeter every hour, check doors, sit in the little office watching the cameras. That night it was just after 2 a.m. Cold, no wind, sky mostly covered with low clouds, the kind that block out the stars but still glow faintly from whatever lights below. I was doing one of my outside checks, walking along the edge of the lot. Everything was normal. Lights buzzing faintly overhead, the usual hum you stop noticing after a while. Then the farthest light flickered, just once, then it dimmed. Not off completely, just weaker. I stopped walking. Looked down the row, all the other lights were still normal, bright, steady. I figured it was just a bulb going out. Happens. I took a few more steps, then the next light in line flickered. Same thing, a quick dip in brightness, then settling at a dimmer level. That's when I slowed down. It wasn't random, it was moving. The lights were dimming one after another, in a straight line, toward me. I stood there, watching. The third light flickered, dimmed, then the fourth. Same pattern. No sound change, no buzzing or popping, just the light levels dropping in sequence, like something was passing under them or through them. I took a step back without really thinking. The next light in the line flickered, dimmed, closer now. I looked up at the one above me, still bright, still normal. I glanced toward the building. Everything else looked fine. No alarms, no movement inside, just that line of lights changing one by one. I felt that tight feeling in my chest start to build. Not panic, just awareness, like something was off in a way I couldn't explain. The next light dimmed, then the next, each one closer than the last. I stepped backward again, eyes tracking the progression. The pattern didn't change. Flicker, dim, pause, then the next. I realized I was breathing slower, like I was trying not to make noise, even though there was nothing to hear. I stopped moving. The light directly in front of me flickered, then dimmed. Now there was just one left between me and whatever was causing it, the one above me. I looked up again, still bright, still steady. Then something else caught my attention. Above the building, in the clouds, there was a pale glow, faint, barely noticeable at first, just a slightly brighter patch against the gray. I squinted, trying to focus on it. It didn't look like reflected light, more like something behind the clouds or within them. The shape wasn't clear, just a soft, diffused glow. But it wasn't moving like the clouds were. It stayed in one place. I glanced back down. The last light before me flickered, dimmed. Now it was just the one above me left. I felt the air shift slightly. Not wind, just a subtle pressure change, like the moment before a storm, but without any of the usual signs. The glow above the building grew a little brighter, still faint, still contained, but more noticeable now. I looked up fully, trying to see more detail. The clouds didn't break, but the light behind them seemed to have shape, a vague outline, wide, flat, hard to define. I heard a faint sound, not from the lights, not from the building, from above. A low, almost electrical hum, very quiet, barely there. I looked back down. The light above me flickered, once, twice, then dimmed. Now the entire row behind me was darker. Every light in that straight line reduced to the same lower brightness. Everything else in the lot stayed normal. I stood there, right at the edge of where it had reached. The hum above me grew slightly stronger, still quiet, but more present. I looked up again. The glow in the clouds was directly overhead now, or close to it. The shape felt larger, more defined, even though I still couldn't see edges clearly. Just that it occupied space, that it was there. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down slightly. My ears popped. Not painfully, just enough to notice. I swallowed. The pressure stayed for a second, then eased. I didn't move, didn't want to. The hum peaked for a moment, then dropped, and just like that, the glow faded, not slowly. Just gone. The clouds returned to their normal dim gray. The hum stopped completely. At the same time, the lights behind me brightened, one by one, in reverse. Each one flickered back to full brightness, moving away from me this time. Until the entire row was normal again, I stood there for a few seconds, not moving. Listening. Everything sounded the same as before. The usual buzz of the lights, the distant, faint noise from the road miles away. Nothing unusual. I looked up again. Nothing. Just clouds. I walked back toward the building slowly, checked the panel inside. No faults, no outages recorded. Everything looked normal. But the part that stayed with me wasn't just the lights. It was how they dimmed in a straight line toward me. Like something was moving across that space. Something I couldn't see. And how the glow above matched it, like whatever passed over the lot was affecting everything beneath it, for just those few seconds, before it moved on, and left everything exactly how it was before. I noticed it because my ears popped before I even saw anything. My name's Connor. I was driving back from a late shift, cutting through a long rural road I take most nights. It's mostly farmland with stretches of trees, barely any streetlights once you're out of the small town. It was clear that night, cold but not freezing. Sky full of stars. I remember that part because I'd glanced up through the windshield earlier, just to stay awake. Everything looked normal. I was maybe 10 minutes from home when my ears suddenly popped. Not gently, like going up a hill. Sharp, like when a plane drops altitude too fast. I swallowed, expecting it to clear. It didn't. The pressure stayed. I slowed down slightly, instinct more than anything. The road ahead was empty. No other cars, no animals, nothing. Just the beam of my headlights stretching out in front of me. I swallowed again, still no change. That's when I looked up. There was a patch of sky ahead that didn't look right. At first I thought it was a cloud, but it wasn't blocking the stars. The stars were still visible through it, just wrong. They looked distorted, like I was seeing them through a layer of warped glass. Bent slightly out of place, some stretched, some shifted, not by much, but enough that your brain catches it immediately. I leaned forward a bit, squinting. The shape of the patch wasn't sharp, more like a vague oval, hanging over the road. It didn't move like the rest of the sky. It stayed fixed in that position as I approached. The pressure in my ears got worse. I could feel it in my jaw now, a dull ache building. I slowed down even more, maybe 25. Part of me wanted to stop, but I didn't. I just kept rolling forward. The distorted patch grew larger in my view. The stars inside it shifted slightly as I moved, not in a way that matched my movement, more like they were drifting independently. Slow, subtle changes. I rolled the window down a bit. Cold air rushed in. The pressure didn't change. If anything, it felt stronger, like something was pushing down from above. I looked back at the road, still clear, still empty. Then, back up. The patch was almost directly overhead now. I could see more detail. Not detail like a surface, just a sense of depth, like it wasn't part of the sky, more like a layer between me and it. The stars within it looked further away somehow, or closer. I couldn't tell. I felt that pop again, harder this time. My ears rang slightly afterward. I gripped the wheel tighter without realizing it. My chest felt tight. Not panic, just pressure. Like the air itself was heavier. I drove directly under it. For a second, everything felt off. Not visually, just wrong. The car felt lighter, just for a moment, like the suspension had eased up. Then it was gone. I was past it. The pressure in my ears eased almost immediately. Not fully gone, but fading. I checked the rearview mirror. The patch was still there, behind me now, same shape, same distortion. It didn't move, didn't follow, just stayed in that spot over the road. I kept driving, didn't stop, didn't turn around, just kept going. After maybe 30 seconds, I checked the mirror again. It was still visible, but smaller now, further away. Then after another few seconds, it wasn't. The sky behind me looked normal again. Stars back where they should be. No distortion, no patch, nothing. I slowed down a bit more, trying to process it. My ears felt normal again, no pressure, no ringing, just quiet. The road ahead looked the same as always, nothing out of place. I glanced at the clock on the dash, 2:18. I'd been looking at the road just a few minutes earlier. It didn't feel like much time had passed, but something about it felt longer, like that stretch of road had taken more time than it should have. I didn't stop to check anything, just drove the rest of the way home. When I pulled into my driveway, everything felt normal again. Same house, same street, same silence. But the part that stayed with me wasn't just how the stars looked wrong. It was how the pressure hit before I even saw it. Like I'd already entered something, before I realized it was there. And how, for that brief moment driving under it, it felt less like passing beneath something in the sky and more like passing through something that wasn't supposed to be there at all. I noticed it because the wingtip light stopped making sense. My name's Aaron. I was on a late flight from Glasgow to Madrid, window seat, right over the wing. It was one of those overnight ones where everyone settles in, pulls the shades half down, and the cabin lights get dimmed to that soft orange. I wasn't asleep. I never really sleep on planes. I'd been staring out the window for a while, just watching the usual stuff. Wing flexing slightly, the red navigation light blinking at the tip, the faint glow of clouds below every now and then. Then I saw another light. At first I thought it was a reflection. It was off to the left of the wing, further out and brighter than the wingtip light. White. Steady. No blinking. I shifted a bit in my seat, trying to see if it moved with me. It didn't. It stayed fixed out there, far beyond the wing. I leaned closer to the window. The glass was cold against my forehead. The light was still there. Same position, same brightness. I checked the wingtip light again. Red, blinking at a steady interval. Normal. Then back to the white light. It wasn't blinking at all, just constant. I sat back and tried to think of what it could be. Another plane, maybe, but it didn't look right. Planes move relative to each other, even at cruising altitude. You see them drift slightly. Change position. This didn't. It stayed level, perfectly level, like it was locked in place. I watched it for a minute or two. No change, no flicker, no movement. I checked the time on the seat screen, 01:47. I kept watching. Every now and then I'd glance away and then back, expecting it to have shifted. It never did. Same spot, same distance. I tried to judge how far away it was. Impossible. No reference points, just darkness around it. I noticed something else then. It wasn't illuminating anything. No halo, no light spill, just a point. Bright, but contained. I looked around the cabin. Most people had their window shades down. The guy next to me was asleep, head tilted toward the aisle. No one else seemed to be looking out. I pressed the call button. A few seconds later, one of the flight attendants came down the aisle. Her name tag said Elena. She leaned slightly toward me. "Everything okay?" I pointed out the window. "Can you see that?" She followed my gesture, glanced out for maybe half a second, then pulled her head back. Too quickly, like she hadn't really looked. "It's probably another aircraft," she said almost immediately. "It's not moving," I said. She gave a small, polite smile. "At this altitude, it can look like that sometimes." She didn't look again, just nodded and moved on. I turned back to the window. The light was still there, unchanged. I checked the time again. 1:51. It had been at least 4 minutes, still no movement. That's when it started feeling off. Not scary, just wrong. I watched the wingtip again. The red light blinked, reflected faintly on the engine casing. Everything normal. Then back to the white light. Still there, still steady. I noticed the plane shifted slightly, just a minor adjustment, maybe turbulence or a course correction. The wing dipped a little, the horizon line changed, but the light didn't. It stayed perfectly level, not relative to the wing, relative to something else, like it wasn't tied to our movement at all. I leaned forward again, trying to get a better angle. The light stayed exactly where it was. I sat back slowly. My chest felt tight. I pressed the call button again. This time a different attendant came over. Older, maybe late 40s. Her name tag said Marina. I pointed out the window again. There's something out there. She didn't even lean in this time, just kept her distance slightly. "I'm sure it's nothing to worry about," she said. "I just want you to look at it." I said. She shook her head lightly. It's likely another aircraft at cruising altitude. It hasn't moved, I said. Her expression didn't change. She gave a short nod and moved on. Didn't look. Didn't even try. That's when I stopped asking. I turned back to the window. The light was still there, same brightness, same position. I checked the time again, 01:56. Almost 10 minutes now. No change, no blinking, no drift, just pacing us. I tried to focus on something else. Opened the seat screen. Flipped through options. But my eyes kept going back to the window. It was still there every time. At one point I thought it had gotten slightly brighter, not by much, just enough to notice. Then it returned to how it was before. Or maybe my eyes were playing tricks, I wasn't sure anymore. The cabin felt quieter than it should have been. Not silent, but muted, like everything had dropped a level. I looked around again, same as before, people asleep, shades down, no one else reacting. I turned back to the window, the light was still there. Then without any transition, it was gone, not fading, not moving away, just not there anymore. The space where it had been was empty. I blinked, leaned forward, scanned the area, nothing, just darkness. I waited, maybe it would reappear. It didn't. I checked the time, at 58. I sat there for a while longer, staring out at the empty sky. The wingtip light blinked steadily. The engine hummed like normal. Everything felt ordinary again. But the part that stuck with me wasn't just that the light had been there. It was how it stayed perfectly level the entire time. Even when the plane shifted. Like it wasn't matching our movement, but something else. Something fixed, that we were moving alongside for those 10 minutes before it stopped and disappeared completely without ever changing or acknowledging us at all. I was already outside when the power went out. My name's Daniel. I live on a quiet street, nothing special, just a row of houses that all look kind of the same. It was late, maybe around 11:30. I'd been sitting on the porch because it was warm, no wind, just one of those still nights where everything feels a little too quiet. The lights inside flickered once, then everything went dark. Not just my house, the whole street. Porch lights, street lights, the house across from me. Everything cut at the same time. At first, I didn't think much of it. Power outages happen. I even remember checking my phone and seeing I still had signal. No notifications about it yet, though. What stood out right away was the silence. It got noticeably quieter. No hum from anything electrical, no distant TVs. Even the faint buzz from the streetlight that's usually at the corner was gone. I sat there for a bit, just letting my eyes adjust. The sky was clear for the most part, a few clouds, but nothing heavy. You could see stars between them. After maybe a minute or two, I noticed something off. There was a patch of cloud, not very big, maybe the size of a few houses if you stretched your arm out and looked at it. It looked darker at first, like a thicker part of the cloud cover. Then it started to glow, not bright, just a faint, soft light from inside it. Kind of like when lightning lights up clouds, except there was no flash, no sudden burst. It just appeared, a steady glow. Pale, almost white with a slight blue tint. I leaned forward in the chair, trying to get a better look. The rest of the sky stayed normal, just that one section. I waited for thunder or another flash. Nothing. The glow stayed consistent. Then I noticed it was moving. At first I thought it was just the cloud drifting, but the direction was wrong. The wind had been pushing the clouds slowly from left to right all evening. You could tell by watching them over time. This patch was moving the opposite way, slowly, but clearly against the direction everything else was going. I stood up without really thinking about it. Stepped out onto the small bit of grass in front of the porch. The glow kept moving. Not changing size, not flickering. Just sliding through the cloud layer like it was behind it, not inside it. Or maybe inside, but separate. It didn't illuminate anything below. The houses stayed dark, the street stayed dark. No shadows, just that contained glow in the sky. I looked up and down the street. A couple of other porch doors had opened. I saw Mrs. Hargreaves from 2 houses down standing in her doorway, looking up the same way I was. Neither of us said anything. There wasn't really anything to say. The glow kept moving. Slow, steady. Then it stopped. Not gradually, just stopped. Right above the middle of the block. Hung there for a few seconds, completely still. The rest of the clouds continued drifting normally. So now you had this one patch, glowing faintly, frozen in place while everything else moved around it. That's when I started feeling uneasy. Up until then, I was curious more than anything. Now, it felt different, like whatever it was had noticed something, or decided something. I took a few steps further out onto the pavement, still looking up. The glow didn't change, didn't get brighter, didn't dim, just stayed there. Then something else hit me. There was no sound at all. Not even distant traffic, no dogs barking, nothing. It wasn't just quiet, it felt like the sound had been turned off. I shifted my weight, and even the scrape of my shoe against the pavement sounded dull, like it didn't carry properly. I glanced back toward the house, half expecting to see something different there. Everything looked normal, just dark. I looked back up. The glow was still there, same place, same intensity. Then after maybe 5 seconds of that stillness, it disappeared. Not fading, not dimming, just gone, like someone flipped a switch. The cloud returned to looking like every other cloud in the sky, no trace of the light, and right after that, everything came back on. At once. Every porch light, every house, the street lights, all of it. Instantly. There was no flicker, no gradual return, just full power, like nothing had happened. The sudden brightness made me squint. I heard the low hum of electricity again, the usual background noise coming back like it had been waiting. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A TV turned on inside someone's house. Normal sounds. I stood there for a few seconds, still looking up. The sky looked completely ordinary now. Clouds drifting in the right direction. No glow. No odd movement. I looked over at Mrs. Hargreaves. She was still standing there, but she'd lowered her gaze. We made brief eye contact. Neither of us said anything. She just stepped back inside and closed her door. I stayed out there a bit longer, watching the same patch of sky where it had been. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I went back onto the porch and sat down. Checked my phone again. Still no outage report, no alerts, nothing. Like it hadn't even registered anywhere. The part that stuck with me wasn't just the glow, it was how it moved differently from everything else, and how it stopped exactly where it did, and how the power came back the second it disappeared. Like whatever was in that cloud wasn't just passing through, it had paused and then left, and only then everything returned to normal. I woke up because the inside of the tent was glowing. At first I thought it was morning, but the color was wrong. My name's Ryan. I was camping alone by a lake I'd been into a couple times before. Nothing remote enough to be dangerous, but far enough out that you don't get much noise or light from anywhere else. Just trees, water, and a rough dirt track that leads in. I'd set up right near the shoreline, maybe 20 feet back where the ground was flat. Weather had been calm all evening. No wind, clear sky, cold but manageable. I remember falling asleep without any issue. Then I opened my eyes and everything inside the tent was lit up pale blue. Not bright like a torch, just enough to see everything clearly. My sleeping bag, my boots by the entrance, the folds of the tent fabric, all tinted blue. I stayed still for a second, trying to figure out what I was looking at. It didn't look like light coming through the fabric from outside. There were no shadows, no direction to it. It was just there. Even. Everywhere. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. The ground beneath me felt normal, cold, slightly uneven, but the light seemed to be coming from below, not shining through the sides, through the floor. I pressed my hand flat against the tent base. Nothing unusual at first. Then I noticed the color was slightly stronger around my hand, like I was closer to the source. I shifted my weight and sat up fully. The light didn't change, still even, still silent. I listened carefully. Nothing. No wind through the trees, no water moving, no insects, just complete stillness. I reached for my phone, which I kept beside me. The screen lit up normally, 0226. I turned the brightness down and held it out, comparing it to the blue glow. They didn't mix. The phone's light felt separate. The blue stayed consistent. I turned the phone off again. The tent returned to that same pale glow. I leaned forward and unzipped the door slightly, just enough to look out. Dark, completely normal. No blue light outside, no source I could see. I closed the flap again and looked down at the floor. The light seemed strongest directly beneath me, faintly fading toward the edges, like something below was lighting upward. I felt that tight, uneasy feeling start to build. Not panic, just something not right. I shifted my legs, moving to one side. The light followed, or maybe I moved into a brighter spot. It was hard to tell. I pressed my palm flat again. The ground felt solid. Cold dirt, no heat, no vibration, nothing that matched what I was seeing. I sat there for another few seconds, just watching, trying to catch any change. There wasn't any. Then the light pulsed, very faint, barely noticeable. But it dimmed slightly, then returned to its original level. I held my breath, waiting. Another pulse. Same thing. A slow dip in brightness, then back. No sound. No movement in the tent. Just that shift. I decided to step outside. I unzipped the door fully this time and crawled out. The air hit me immediately. Cold. Still. I stood up and turned back toward the tent. From outside, there was no glow. The fabric looked dark, normal. I crouched down and touched the ground beside the tent. Cold dirt, nothing unusual. I looked up. The sky was clear, stars visible, no clouds, no light above. Then I turned toward the lake. It was completely still, not just calm, still. No ripples, no movement at all. The surface looked flat, almost solid. I stepped closer to the water's edge. My boots made a soft crunch on the dirt. The sound felt too loud in the quiet. I stopped a few feet from the shoreline, stared at the water. It didn't reflect the stars properly. They were there, but slightly blurred, like the surface wasn't behaving the way water should. I listened. Nothing. No insects, no wind, no distant sounds. Even my own breathing felt muted. I took another step forward. The water didn't react. No ripple from the movement, no disturbance. I crouched down and reached out, touching the surface with my fingers. It felt like water, cold. But the moment I touched it, the surface shifted. Not rippling outward, just a small, contained movement around my hand. Then still again. I pulled my hand back slowly. The lake returned to that same flat, unmoving state. I stood up and looked back at the tent. Still no visible glow from outside. But something felt off. Like the space around it was slightly different, hard to explain. Just a subtle sense that it didn't belong fully in the scene anymore. I walked back toward it. Each step felt heavier than it should have, like the air had thickened. I reached the entrance and looked inside. The blue glow was still there. Same intensity, same even spread. I hesitated for a second, then climbed back in. As soon as I was inside, the light surrounded me again. No transition, just immediate. I sat down on the sleeping bag. The ground beneath me felt the same, but the light seemed closer now, stronger. I pressed my hand down again. For a second, I thought I felt something. Not movement, just a slight difference in pressure, like the ground wasn't entirely solid. Then it was gone. I pulled my hand back. The light pulsed again, slight dim, then back. I checked my phone, 02:27. Only a minute had passed. It felt longer. I stayed there, sitting in the glow, not moving. Watching, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. After a while, the light began to fade, slowly, evenly, like it was sinking back into the ground. Within maybe 10 seconds, it was gone. The tent was dark again. I sat there in silence, listening. The normal sounds returned gradually. A faint breeze through the trees, a distant ripple from the lake. Everything felt back. I lay down again eventually. Didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, everything looked normal. The lake moved like it should. The ground felt solid, no sign of anything unusual. But the part that stuck with me wasn't just the light, it was how it came from below. And how the lake stopped completely. Like whatever was under the ground was affecting everything above it. Just for that moment before settling back out of sight. I first noticed it on the third night running that route. My name's Marcus. I drive long haul, mostly overnight runs through the same stretch of highway that cuts across open land for miles. No towns, no lights, just road and fields and the occasional rest stop way off in the distance. I usually pass through that section around the same time every night, give or take 10 minutes. Around 2 a.m., the first couple of nights were normal. Then on the third, I saw it. Off to the right side of the road, an orange light. Not bright. Not dim either. Just steady. Hovering above the ground, maybe 50 feet up if I had to guess. I didn't think much of it at first. Figured it was a tower light or something I hadn't noticed before. Except there aren't any towers out there, and it wasn't blinking, just sitting there. I watched it as I drove. It didn't move, didn't get closer, didn't get further away, just stayed in that same position relative to the road. I passed it, kept going, and forgot about it. The next night, same thing. Same spot, same height, same color, same brightness. That's when I paid more attention. I slowed down slightly as I approached it, tried to see if there was anything beneath it, any structure, anything that could explain it. There wasn't, just empty land, flat, dark. The light hung there, not attached to anything. I watched it through the side window as I passed. It didn't react, didn't shift, just stayed exactly where it was. I checked my mirrors after passing it. Nothing. Gone. Not fading out. Just not visible anymore once I was past it. I told myself it was some kind of distant light that just looked closer than it was. But that didn't explain why it was in the exact same place the next night and the night after that. Always around 2 a.m., always the same position, always the same intensity. It never changed. After a week of this, I started checking my dash cam. Figured I'd at least confirm what I was seeing. I pulled the footage from one of the runs, scrolled to the time I knew I passed it. The road was there, the empty field. Everything normal, but the light wasn't. Not even a faint glow. Nothing. I watched it again, frame by frame. Still nothing, just dark. I checked another night, same thing, no light. Even though I remembered seeing it clearly. That started bothering me, not in a panic way, just enough that it stayed in the back of my mind. I kept driving the route, kept seeing it. Every night, same place, same time, same light. It got to the point where I'd check the clock as I approached that stretch. 2:02. Right on schedule. There it was. Like it was waiting, it never moved closer, never drifted, never flickered, just hovered. Sometimes I'd slow down more than usual, sometimes I'd speed up a bit. Didn't matter, it stayed fixed. Like it wasn't tied to distance, more like it was tied to that exact spot. One night I tried something different. I pulled over a mile before where it usually appeared, turned off the engine, waited. The road was empty, dead quiet. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes. Nothing, no light. I started the truck again and kept driving. As soon as I reached that stretch, there it was. Same as always, like it only showed up when I was moving through that exact point. I stopped checking the dash cam after a while. It never showed anything, just empty road. Then one night, it changed. I was coming up on the usual stretch. Checked the time, 2:03. Right where I expected it. I glanced to the right, the light was there. Same as always, steady, orange, hovering. I kept my eyes on it longer than usual, trying to see if there was any kind of pattern I'd missed. Anything at all. There wasn't. I looked back at the road, then checked the mirrors briefly. Everything normal. Then I looked forward again, and it was in front of me, not off to the side, not distant. Right there, above the road, directly ahead, same height, same brightness, just positioned in front of the truck now. I felt my hands tighten on the wheel. I didn't slam the brakes, didn't swerve, I just held steady. The light didn't move, didn't react, it just hovered there, centered in my lane. I slowed down slightly, heart rate picking up, but not panicking. Just trying to understand what I was seeing. The distance between me and the light didn't change. No matter how I adjusted speed, it stayed fixed. Like it wasn't actually ahead in the way it looked. More like it was aligned with me. I leaned forward, trying to see around it. There was nothing behind it, no obstruction, just the road continuing into darkness. The light stayed perfectly still. There's no sound, no flicker, just that same steady glow. I glanced down at the dash. Everything normal, speed steady, no warnings. I looked back up. The light was still there, exactly the same. Then after maybe 5 seconds, it was gone. Not fading, not moving, just gone. The road ahead was empty again. I checked the mirrors immediately. Nothing behind me, nothing to the sides, just darkness. I kept driving, didn't stop, didn't slow down any more than I already had. My chest felt tight, but I stayed focused on the road. After a minute or so, I reached for the dash cam later that day. Checked the footage. The moment where the light should have been in front of me, there was nothing. Just the road. Clear. Empty. No obstruction, no glow, no sign of anything. I watched it multiple times. Frame by frame, nothing. After that night, the light went back to how it was before, off to the side, same position, same time, like nothing had changed. But I couldn't shake it. The fact that it had moved just once, and only when I was looking straight ahead, and that it never showed up on camera, like it wasn't part of the road or the distance or even the space around me, just something that appeared exactly where it needed to be for me to see it and nowhere else. I noticed it with my eyes closed. I was lying on my back, trying to fall asleep, not really tired, but not awake enough to do anything else. My name's Lewis. It was a weekday night, nothing unusual. Quiet street, semi-detached house, curtains pulled, lights off. At first I thought it was just my eyes adjusting in the dark, but the room kept getting brighter, not steadily, in pulses. Slow, soft increases in light, like distant lightning behind clouds, except there was no sound. No rumble, no flicker of a storm, just a gradual brightening, then fading. I kept my eyes closed for a bit, trying to ignore it. You know how sometimes your eyelids pick up light changes from outside, like a car passing or someone switching something on? It felt like that, but slower, more controlled. The light would build for a couple seconds, hold very slightly, then fade back out. Then a pause, then again. I opened my eyes. The room was dim, but I could see the edges of things more clearly than I should have been able to. The wardrobe, the chair by the wall, the outline of the door. Then it dimmed again. I stayed still, staring at the ceiling. Another pulse. The room brightened slowly. No shadows moved. That's what stood out first. The light increased, but nothing shifted. No angle change. No source I could identify. Just more visibility. Then it faded. I sat up a little, leaning on one elbow, waited. Another pulse. Same thing. Gradual increase. Then fade. I checked my phone. 2:18. No notifications. No weather alerts. I listened carefully. Nothing. No wind outside. No distant thunder. No cars. The house was completely still. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat up fully. The floor felt cold under my feet. I waited through another pulse. This time I watched the walls. The brightness increased evenly, like the light wasn't coming from one direction. It was just filling the room, then fading again. I stood up and walked to the window. The curtain was closed, but not fully tight. A thin gap at the edge. I pulled it back slightly. Outside was dark, completely normal. Street light down the road, faint glow from a neighbor's window. Nothing unusual. No flashes, no light sources. I looked up at the sky, clear, no clouds, no storm. I stepped back from the window. Another pulse hit. The room brightened again, but outside stayed the same. That's when I noticed something else. The light inside didn't match anything outside. It was slightly cooler. Almost white, but not quite. I walked back to the bed slowly, sat down again, waited another pulse, same pattern, same my phone again, 0219. Only a minute had passed. It felt longer. I stayed sitting there, counting the intervals, roughly 10 seconds between pulses, maybe a bit more. I tried to match it to anything, distant lights, electrical issues, nothing made sense. I got up again and checked the hallway. Opened the door slowly. Dark. No lights on anywhere. The rest of the house was quiet. I stood there for a moment, then went back into my room and closed the door. Another pulse. The room brightened. I looked directly at the ceiling this time, trying to see if the light had any direction to it. It didn't. No source. No shadow shift. Just a uniform increase in brightness. Then it faded again. I felt that pressure in my ears. Subtle at first, like a slight change in air pressure. I swallowed. It didn't fully go away. I sat back on the bed, watching. Another pulse. The pressure increased slightly with it, then eased as the light faded. I checked my phone again. 2:21. Time was moving normally. I stayed there, watching the pulses. They continued the same way. Same timing. Same intensity. After a while, I got tired of trying to figure it out. Not sleepy. Just drained. I lay back down, still facing the ceiling. Let the pulses happen without reacting to them. Eventually, I closed my eyes again. The light still came through my eyelids. Same pattern, same slow build and fade. At some point, I must have drifted, not fully asleep, just that in-between state. Then I woke up again, suddenly like something had stopped. The room was dark, no pulse, no brightness, just normal night. I sat up quickly, waited. Nothing happened. I checked my phone, 0233. I frowned. That didn't feel right. I'd last checked it at 0221. I hadn't been asleep that long. It didn't feel like it. I unlocked the phone and looked at the clock app. No alarms, no missed notifications, nothing to explain the gap. I stood up and went to the window again. Pulled the curtain back fully this time. The street was still, no movement, no light changes, everything normal. I looked up at the sky, still clear, still quiet. I went back to the bed slowly, sat down, checked the phone again. Time was moving normally now. I waited for another pulse. Nothing came. The room stayed dark. The pressure in my ears was gone. Everything felt normal again. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, trying to replay it, the pulses, the timing, the way the light filled the room without a source. And the part I couldn't shake was the gap. 12 minutes gone. No transition. No memory of it passing. Just skipped. Like the light hadn't just been outside or even in the room, but somehow involved in that missing stretch of time, like whatever was causing it didn't just affect what I could see, but how long I was actually there to see it. I noticed it because Milo stopped walking. He never does that. He's a lab, always pulling a bit ahead, nose down, distracted by everything. But that morning he just froze mid-step, leash going tight in my hand. It was still dark, maybe half an hour before sunrise. My name's Dan. I usually take him out around that time before work, just a quick loop through the estate and back. Quiet streets, same route every day. I stopped when he did, thinking he'd picked up a scent. "Milo," I said, giving the leash a light tug. He didn't move, didn't even look at me. His whole body had gone stiff, ears forward, head tilted slightly upward. That's when I heard the barking. At first it was just one dog, somewhere a few houses down, then another joined in, then another. Within a few seconds, it spread, every direction. Different pitches, different distances, but all going at once. Not the usual chain reaction where one sets another off randomly. This was too quick, too synchronized. I stood there, trying to place where it was coming from. Milo still hadn't moved. I followed his line of sight. Up. The sky looked normal at first. Dark blue, just starting to lighten near the horizon. A few stars still visible. I squinted, trying to see what he was focused on. Nothing obvious. No plane lights, no drone, no movement, just empty sky. The barking kept going, louder now, closer. I could hear at least 4 or 5 dogs nearby, all facing the same direction from the sound of it. I shifted my position slightly, stepping to the side. Milo's head tracked something, just slightly, like whatever he was looking at had moved. I looked up again, still nothing. I felt that tightness start in my chest. Not panic, just that sense that something wasn't lining up. "Milo," I said again, a bit firmer. He didn't respond, didn't blink, just stared. The barking changed. It wasn't random anymore. It had settled into this constant, steady noise. No breaks, no variation, just all of them going at once. I stepped forward trying to get him moving. He resisted, not pulling back, just locked in place like he couldn't. I looked up again, focusing harder this time. That's when I saw it. At first it was barely there. A faint difference in the sky, like a patch where the stars looked slightly off. Not gone, not covered, just distorted. I narrowed my eyes, trying to make sense of it. The shape became clearer as I focused. Circular, not perfectly sharp, but enough to make out an edge, like a faint outline, and it was moving, slowly, across the sky. I felt my throat go dry. It wasn't glowing, not really, just a subtle shift in how the sky looked, like something transparent passing over it. The stars behind it looked dimmer, slightly blurred, then clearer again as it moved on. I stood completely still, watching. The circle drifted steadily from left to right. No sound, no change in speed, just movement. Milo's body was rigid now, not trembling, just locked. I reached down and touched his back. His muscles were tight. He didn't react. The barking kept going, unbroken. I looked around briefly. Lights were starting to come on in a few houses. People probably waking up, hearing it, but no one was outside. No one else looking up. I turned back to the sky. The circular outline was more noticeable now. Not because it had changed, but because I knew where to look. It passed over a cluster of stars. For a second, they seemed to dim together, then return, like something had moved between them and me. I felt that pressure in my ears. Subtle at first, then slightly stronger. I swallowed. It didn't fully clear. The air felt heavier, like the space around me had thickened. I shifted my weight. Milo's head adjusted again, tracking the movement. The circle continued across the sky. Still silent, still steady. I had tried to judge its size. It was hard, no reference point, but it covered a decent section of sky. Big enough that it couldn't be close, or if it was, it had to be enormous. The barking suddenly stopped, all at once, not fading out, just cut. Every dog, silent. The quiet that followed felt wrong, too sudden, too complete. Milo didn't relax. He stayed frozen, eyes still locked upward. The circular outline reached the edge of my view. Then it was gone. Not fading, not shrinking. Just moving out of sight. I waited. Nothing else appeared. The sky returned to normal, stars clear, no distortion. The pressure in my ears eased. The air felt lighter again. Milo blinked, just once. Then he shook his head slightly, like he was coming out of something. I gave the leash a gentle pull. This time he moved, slow at first, then normal, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment longer, looking up at the empty sky, waiting for something else. Nothing came. After a few seconds, I started walking again. Milo kept pace beside me. No hesitation, no pulling, just calm. The rest of the walk was quiet. No more barking, no movement in the sky. Everything felt normal again. But I kept thinking about how all the dogs reacted at the same time, before I saw anything, like they noticed it first. And how Milo didn't just watch it, he froze. Like whatever passed over us wasn't just something to see, but something that held everything still. Just long enough to cross the sky without being fully seen. I was already halfway through the pass when it started. My name's Aaron. I was driving back from visiting a friend out in the hills, cutting through a mountain route I'd taken a few times before. It's one of those roads that winds along the ridge, no barriers in some places, just reflective signs every so often marking bends and drops. It was late, around 11:30, maybe closer to midnight. No other cars for miles. My headlights were the only thing lighting the road. I had my GPS on, even though I knew the way. Signal gets patchy up there, so I liked having it just in case. Everything felt normal. Cold night, clear sky, road dry. Then the signs lit up, all at once. Not the ones in my headlights, the ones further ahead, way further. I could see a stretch of the road climbing up and bending left along the ridge, and every reflective marker along that section suddenly caught light. Bright. Like they were being hit by high beams. But my headlights weren't reaching that far, not even close. I slowed down instinctively, foot easing off the accelerator. The lights stayed on, steady, not flickering like reflections usually do when your angle changes. Just lit. I frowned, leaning forward slightly, trying to see what could be causing it. There were no other cars, no headlights coming the other way, no light source behind me. I checked the rearview mirror. Empty road. Dark. I looked ahead again. The signs were still glowing, and that's when I noticed the sky. Above the ridgeline, there was a dull white glow, not bright enough to light the ground. Just sitting there, like a patch of light hanging in the air. No shape to it, no edges, just a soft, diffuse glow. I slowed the car down even more, almost to a crawl. The engine noise felt louder now in the quiet. I cracked the window slightly. Cold air came in. No sound from outside. No wind. No distant noise. Nothing. I kept moving forward slowly. The signs stayed lit, every single one along that stretch. I tried to track the glow above. It wasn't moving, not drifting, not expanding, just hanging there, centered above the ridge. I swallowed, feeling that familiar pressure in my ears. Subtle, but there, like when you're changing altitude. I drove a little further. The bend in the road came closer, the signs ahead still glowing, too evenly, too consistently. Normally, night reflectors brighten and dim depending on your angle. These didn't. They looked like they were being lit directly. I glanced down at the GPS. The map was still there, but the little arrow showing my position wasn't moving. It was stuck a few turns back. I tapped the screen. Nothing changed. I looked back up. The glow above the ridge seemed slightly brighter now. Still not casting light downward, just existing. I slowed the car to a stop, right there in the middle of the road. Engine idling, headlights pointing ahead. The signs in my actual beam looked normal, but beyond that, further up the road, they were still lit, like two separate light sources. I turned off the headlights. The immediate road went dark, but the distant signs, they stayed visible, still glowing faintly, not as bright as before, but still there. I felt my chest tighten a bit. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel lightly, watching, waiting. The glow above the ridge didn't change, didn't flicker, didn't move. The air inside the car felt heavier, like the space had shrunk slightly. I swallowed again, trying to clear my ears. It helped a little. Then, after maybe 5 seconds, the glow started to fade, not dimming evenly. It felt like it was pulling back, upward, the same way something might retract into the dark. The brightness decreased from the edges inward. The signs ahead began to lose their glow at the same time. One by one, but so quickly it almost looked simultaneous. Within a couple seconds, everything was dark again. Just my car sitting there with the headlights off. I turned them back on. The road lit up normally. The reflectors ahead behaved the way they should, only catching light when the beam hit them. I sat there for a moment, engine still running, listening. Nothing unusual, just the faint hum of the car. I checked the GPS again. The map refreshed slightly, then it shifted. My position jumped, not forward along the road, sideways, off the route completely. It showed me somewhere miles away, off in the mountains where there wasn't even a road. I frowned and zoomed in. The arrow sat there, unmoving, nowhere near where I actually was. I tapped the screen again, no change. I looked out through the windshield. The road was exactly where it should be. The signs, the bend, everything matched. But the GPS insisted I wasn't there. I picked up my phone to check the signal. No bars. Completely dead. I hadn't lost signal earlier. I knew that for sure. I sat there for another minute, just trying to figure it out. Nothing else happened. The sky above the ridge was normal again. Stars visible. No glow. The pressure in my ears faded completely. I put the car back in gear and started driving again. Slow at first, watching the signs, watching the sky. Everything stayed normal. The GPS didn't fix itself for another 10 minutes. When it did, the arrow snapped back onto the road, a few miles ahead of where I thought I was. Like it had skipped a section. I didn't turn around to check. I just kept driving. Got out of the pass and onto the main road. Signal came back. Everything looked normal again. But the part I keep thinking about isn't just the lights, it's how the signs lit up before I reached them, like something else was shining on them first. From above, and how the GPS didn't just lose signal, it placed me somewhere else entirely. Like, for a few seconds, I wasn't on that road at all. I noticed it because my shadow didn't match where the sun was. My name's Toby. I was out hiking alone on a ridge trail I'd done a few times before. Nothing extreme, just a steady climb up through open ground with a few scattered trees, then a long stretch along the top where you can see for miles if the weather's clear. That day it wasn't. It was overcast, low cloud cover, but bright enough that you could still see everything clearly. No direct sunlight, just that flat gray light that comes through the clouds. It was early afternoon, maybe around 2. I'd stopped for a break near the top, just off the trail where the ground flattened out a bit. Sat down on a rock, had some water, checked my phone. No signal, which was normal up there. After a few minutes, I stood up again and stretched. That's when I saw my shadow. It was stretched out long in front of me, but the light wasn't coming from behind me. There wasn't even a clear direction to it. The sky was evenly gray, no breaks in the cloud, no sun visible. I turned slightly, trying to figure out where the light source could be. The shadow didn't shift the way it should. It stayed extended in that same direction, like it was anchored. I took a step forward. The shadow moved with me, but the angle stayed wrong. Too sharp, too defined for that kind of lighting. I looked down at it, frowning. The edges were darker than they should have been, almost too clean, like it was being cast by a direct light, not diffused through clouds. I turned around slowly, checked behind me. Nothing. Just open ground and the slope dropping away. No break in the cloud, no sunlight. I looked back down. The shadow was still there, same direction, same length. I raised my hand slightly. The shadow followed, but there was a slight delay. Not much, just enough that I noticed it, like it caught up a fraction of a second later. I held my hand still. The shadow matched again. I lowered it, same tiny delay. That's when I started feeling uneasy, not panicked, just off, like something wasn't lining up properly. I stepped forward again. The shadow stretched ahead of me, still too long for the conditions, still too sharp. I looked around, scanning the ground, the horizon. Nothing stood out. No other shadows looked like that. The rocks nearby had faint, soft edges. Mine was darker, clearer, more defined. I turned again, trying to see if maybe the terrain was causing it somehow. Same result. Then the shadow changed, just slightly. It shortened a bit, not gradually, just a quick shift. I froze, looked down. The angle had adjusted. Still wrong, but different, like the light source had moved. I slowly lifted my head and looked up. At first, I didn't see anything, just the same gray cloud cover. Flat, unbroken. Then I noticed a darker patch, high above, barely visible. It wasn't a cloud. It was too smooth, too uniform. A shape against the clouds, but only just, like it was reflecting less light than everything else. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. The edges became clearer the longer I looked. Not sharp, but defined enough to see that it was there. It was large. Hard to judge exactly, but it stretched wider than I expected, and it was moving, slowly, drifting across the sky. No sound, no visible propulsion, just a steady, silent movement. I stood there, watching it. My shadow shifted again. The angle changed to match whatever that thing was doing overhead. That's when it clicked. The shadow wasn't coming from the sky in general. It was coming from that, whatever it was. I kept looking up, trying to see more detail. The surface looked smooth. Metallic, maybe, but muted, not shiny. Just slightly reflective in a way that didn't match the clouds. There were no lights on it. No markings that I could see. Just that dark, curved shape. It passed over me slowly. The shadow shortened as it moved, then stretched out in the opposite direction, perfectly in sync with it. I felt that pressure in my ears, like when you change altitude quickly, subtle but noticeable. I swallowed. It didn't fully clear. The hair felt heavier for a moment. Still no sound. Even the usual background noise felt reduced. No wind, no birds, nothing. Just me and that thing moving overhead. I took a step back without really thinking. My eyes stayed locked on it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just continued drifting. Eventually it moved far enough that the contrast faded. It blended back into the cloud cover. The edges softened. Then it was gone. Or at least I couldn't see it anymore. I stood there for a few more seconds, staring at the same spot, waiting for it to reappear. It didn't. I looked down. My shadow had returned to normal. Faint. Diffused. Barely there, like it should have been under that kind of sky. I turned slowly, scanning the horizon again. Everything looked ordinary. The ridge, the distant hills, nothing out of place. I stayed up there a bit longer, but I didn't feel like continuing the hike. Something about it stuck with me in a way I couldn't shake. I headed back down the trail, checking the sky every few minutes. Nothing else appeared. No change in the light. No movement overhead. But the part that stayed with me wasn't just seeing it. It was how my shadow reacted first. Like whatever passed above me was already there, affecting the light, before I even realized to look up, and how it moved slow enough that if I hadn't noticed that small detail, I probably would have walked right under it without ever knowing anything was there. I noticed it when the drone started fighting the wind. It wasn't unusual out there. Gusts come in hard around the mountains, especially late afternoon when the heat starts dropping. I'd been flying for about 20 minutes already, just getting wide shots of the desert and the ridgeline in the distance. Nothing special, just footage for a small project I was working on. The sky was clear, but the wind had picked up more than I expected. I could feel it pushing against me, steady and dry, carrying that fine dust smell you only get out there. The drone's feed showed it too, small, constant adjustments to stay level. I checked the altitude, then the GPS lock. Everything was normal. I nudged it a little higher, pointed the camera toward the mountains. The light was good, that late day angle where everything looks sharper than it should. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just glare. A faint spot near the ridgeline, catching the light in a way that didn't match the terrain. I adjusted the camera angle slightly. The spot stayed in place, not drifting, not changing shape, just there. I zoomed in a little. It looked metallic, not reflective like a mirror, but dull like brushed metal, catching just enough light to stand out against the background. It was hovering, no visible support, no movement. I frowned and leaned closer to the controller screen. The wind was strong enough that my drone was constantly correcting its position, small shifts left and right, up and down, but that thing didn't move at all, not even a little. Probably a rock face, I said to myself, but it didn't look attached to anything. It sat just off the slope, a few feet above it, maybe more. Hard to judge distance from the feed, but it wasn't flush with the ground. I pushed the drone a little closer. The signal stayed strong. The object stayed exactly where it was. I kept watching, expecting it to shift or disappear once the angle changed. It didn't. Even as the drone moved, the object held its position relative to the mountain, like it was fixed in space, not the terrain. I checked the wind again. Stronger now. You could see it in the feed, small bits of dust lifting off the ground, moving across the frame. The drone tilted slightly to compensate. The object didn't react. No sway, no drift, nothing. I hovered there for a minute, just watching it, trying to figure out what I was actually looking at. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a car, maybe smaller. Hard to tell without reference points, but it was definitely separate from the mountain. I reached out and tapped the screen, trying to get the camera to refocus. For a split second, the object flickered. Not moved. Flickered. Like the image cut around it, then snapped back. I blinked, thinking it might have been a signal glitch. The feed stabilized. The object was still there. I moved the drone again, slightly to the left. Same thing. The object stayed in place. No change. I started recording, just to be sure I had it. The red indicator popped up on the screen. I held the drone steady, letting the camera capture everything. A few seconds passed, then the object flickered again, this time longer. It didn't disappear completely, but it thinned out like the image was struggling to hold onto it. Then it snapped back. Solid again. I felt that slight tension in my chest, the kind you get when something isn't behaving the way it should. I checked the signal strength. Still good. Battery was fine. Everything on my end was working. I decided to bring the drone a little closer. As I pushed forward, the wind hit harder. The drone tilted more aggressively, fighting to maintain position. The object didn't react. It stayed perfectly still. Not even a slight shift. That didn't make sense. Anything that size should have been affected even a little. I got as close as I felt comfortable, given the wind. The object was clearer now. Smooth surface, no visible seams or markings, just a dull metallic shape, slightly elongated and completely motionless. I hovered there for maybe another 30 seconds. Then the signal cut, not completely, just stuttered. The feed glitched for a second, breaking into blocks. When it came back, the object was gone. I froze, staring at the screen. The mountain was still there, same angle, same position, but the object was gone. I rotated the drone slowly, scanning the area. Nothing. No movement. No trace. I pulled the drone back, brought it down carefully. The wind felt stronger now that I was paying attention to it. Or maybe I just noticed it more. I packed everything up and headed home. Didn't think much about it on the drive. Just figured it was some kind of visual artifact, maybe a glitch in the camera or signal, something explainable. Later that night, I loaded the footage onto my computer. Found the section where I'd seen the object. At first, it looked normal. The drone approaching the mountains, the landscape steady. Then the object appeared, just like I remembered, hovering, still. I watched it a few times, trying to pick up details I might have missed. Then I noticed something. It didn't appear in every frame. I scrubbed back frame by frame. In one frame, it was there. In the next, it was gone. Then back again. Not fading, not moving. Just absent, like it only existed in certain moments of the recording. I leaned back in my chair, replaying it over and over. The timing wasn't consistent either. Sometimes it stayed for 3 or 4 frames in a row, sometimes it vanished for 2, then came back. The mountain behind it stayed perfectly stable, no glitches, no distortion, just the object flickering in and out. I checked the rest of the footage. Nothing else behaved like that, just that one section. I tried to zoom in, enhance it, see if I could get a clearer look. Didn't help. The flickering stayed. I closed the video after a while, left it sitting there on the screen. I went back out a few days later, same spot, same time of day. Flew the drone toward the same ridge. Nothing. No object. No flicker. Just the mountains and the wind. But now, every time I review footage from out there, I don't just watch it. I go frame by frame, just in case something's there for a moment I might have missed. The compass was the first thing that didn't make sense. I'd stopped to check my direction because the trail had started to thin out, more like a suggestion than anything solid. It was late afternoon, overcast, but still bright enough to see clearly. I was on a ridge that runs along the edge of a valley. Nothing extreme, but high enough that you can see for miles when the weather's clear. My name's Owen. I'd been hiking solo most of the day, something I do pretty often. I know how to navigate. I don't rely on just one thing, but I always carry a compass out of habit. I held it flat in my palm and waited for it to settle. It didn't. The needle drifted slightly to the right, then back, then stopped, but not pointing north. I frowned and adjusted my stance, thinking maybe I was holding it at a bad angle. I steadied my hand, waited again. The needle twitched, then slowly, almost reluctantly, moved a few degrees and stopped again. Still wrong. I glanced around, trying to figure out if there was something nearby that could be interfering. Metal, maybe, but there was nothing around me but rock, scrub, and the trail behind me. No structures, no fences, nothing. I took a step to the side and checked it again. Same thing, a slight drift. Then it held in a position that didn't match what I knew the direction should be. I checked my phone next. No signal. Not unusual up there. I opened the map anyway. The GPS indicator spun for a second, then fixed in place. But the orientation felt off. Not wildly, just enough that it didn't line up with the terrain around me. I lowered the phone and looked out over the valley. The light had changed slightly. Not darker, just flatter, like the contrast had been dialed down. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide whether to keep going or head back. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint, far off in the distance across the valley, low, near the ground. At first, I thought it was just sunlight catching something, a reflective surface, maybe a vehicle or a building. But it didn't behave like that. It pulsed once. Not bright, just a soft increase and decrease in intensity. Then it stayed steady. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. The distance made it hard to judge size. It could have been small and close or larger and further away. There was no movement around it, no sign of anything that would explain it. I looked back at the compass. The needle had shifted again, only slightly, but enough that it was now pointing somewhere else entirely. I felt a small knot tighten in my stomach. I turned slowly, trying to match the compass reading with the landscape. Nothing lined up. The ridge, the slope, the tree line below, everything looked normal, but the compass insisted otherwise. I looked back at the glow. Still there, unchanged since that one pulse. I took a few steps forward along the ridge. The ground crunched under my boots. That sound felt dull, like it wasn't carrying properly. I stopped and listened. The wind had dropped, completely. No movement in the trees below, no distant sounds, just a quiet that felt heavier than it should. I took another step, then another, keeping my eyes on the glow. It didn't get any bigger, didn't shift, just held its position. I checked the compass again. The needle drifted, slower this time, like it was trying to settle but couldn't find a point. I shook my head slightly, more out of frustration than anything. Then I noticed something else. The horizon didn't feel stable, not visibly moving, but the line where the land met the sky seemed slightly off, like it wasn't perfectly straight. I blinked a few times, trying to clear my vision. It didn't change. I took a breath and turned away from the valley, looking back along the ridge. The trail behind me looked the same as it had before. No changes, no movement. I turned back to the glow. For a moment, I thought it had dimmed, but then it returned to the same faint level. I checked my watch. It had been maybe 10 minutes since I first noticed the compass acting up. It didn't feel like that long. I took another step forward. The ground beneath me felt slightly warmer. Not hot, just different. I stopped again. The silence pressed in. No wind, no insects, nothing. I looked down at the compass one more time. The needle had stopped moving, but it wasn't pointing anywhere meaningful, just fixed at an angle that didn't correspond to anything. I raised my head slowly. The glow pulsed again, once, same as before, soft, contained. Then it faded, not completely, just reduced slightly, then held there. I stood still watching it, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. After a while, I decided to turn back. I didn't like how the compass was behaving, didn't like how the air felt. I started walking back along the ridge, keeping a steady pace. After a few minutes, I glanced down at the compass again. The needle snapped to north. Clean. Immediate. No drift. No hesitation. I stopped walking, looked back over my shoulder. The valley looked normal, the horizon straight again. The light back to how it should be. I searched for the glow. It was gone. No trace of it. I stood there for a bit, debating whether to go back and check. But something about the way everything had returned to normal so completely made me keep moving. I didn't stop again until I was well off the ridge, back on a clearer part of the trail. Even then, I kept checking the compass. It behaved perfectly, like nothing had ever been wrong. But every now and then, when I think back to it, what sticks with me isn't the glow or the compass on its own. It's how both of them changed at the same time, and then stopped, like whatever had been out there only affected that one stretch of ground. And once I stepped out of it, everything corrected itself, as if I'd moved out of alignment with something I wasn't supposed to notice in the first place. I got the taxi just after midnight outside a pub near the edge of town. It wasn't busy, just a couple of people hanging around waiting for rides and one car idling near the curb. The driver leaned over and unlocked the door when I approached. Older guy, maybe late 50s, didn't say much. Just nodded when I told him the address. I got in the back, shut the door, and the car pulled away almost immediately. It was a normal start. The radio was low, some talk show I wasn't really listening to. The heater was on, a bit too warm, and the windows had that faint fogging you get on cold nights. I sat back, looking out the side window as we drove. The streets were mostly empty. A few parked cars, the occasional light in a house window, nothing unusual. About 5 minutes in, I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was just another car behind us, a headlight catching in the reflection of the window, but it didn't behave like one. It stayed in the same position, not getting closer, not falling back, just there. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to get a better angle. The light was visible in the glass, hovering above and behind the car. Not directly behind like a vehicle, higher, like it was somewhere above the road, following along. I turned my head to look out the rear window. There was nothing there, just darkness and the faint glow of distant streetlights. I looked back at the side window. The reflection showed it clearly, a pale, steady light keeping pace with us. I frowned and leaned forward slightly. "Do you see that?" I asked. The driver didn't respond. I waited a second. "Behind us," I said, a bit louder. He glanced in the rearview mirror, then back at the road. "See what?" he said. "The light." He shook his head slightly. "Just your reflection, probably." I sat back, but it wasn't my reflection. It was too bright, too defined, and it didn't move when I moved. I watched it for a while. It stayed exactly where it was, hovering in the reflection, matching our speed perfectly. We passed a junction. Normally, you'd see headlights shift, change angles, move relative to the car. This didn't. It stayed fixed. I looked out the window again, directly. Still nothing. Just the road, dark and empty. But in the glass, it was there, following. The air in the car felt off. Not immediately noticeable, but after a few minutes, I realized it felt thicker. The heater was still on, but the warmth felt muted somehow. My ears popped. I swallowed, trying to clear it. The pressure stayed for a second, then eased slightly. I looked at the driver again. He seemed completely normal. Hands steady on the wheel, eyes on the road, posture relaxed. The radio had gone quiet. I hadn't noticed when. No static, no voice, just silence. I leaned forward and looked at the dashboard. Everything seemed normal. Speed steady, no warning lights, but the interior lights looked dimmer. Not off, just reduced, like the brightness had been turned down without actually changing anything. I leaned back again. The light in the reflection hadn't changed. It pulsed once, softly, barely noticeable, but enough. My fingers tingled slightly where they rested on my leg. I shifted them, rubbing them together. The feeling didn't go away. I looked back out the rear window again. Still nothing. No source. No explanation. I turned back to the side window. The light seemed closer now. Not physically, just more present. Like it was pressing into the space around the car. The edges of it looked strange. Not sharp, not blurred. More like the air around it was bending slightly. I blinked. The light dimmed slightly, then returned to its original level. My ears popped again. Sharper this time. The pressure built quickly, then held. I opened my mouth to say something to the driver. Nothing came out at first, then when it did, it sounded wrong. Flat. Like it wasn't carrying properly. The driver didn't react. The car kept moving. The road ahead looked normal, but it felt like we'd been driving longer than we should have. I checked my phone. No signal. The time read 12:51. That didn't seem right. I'd gotten in around 12:10. The drive should have been 15 minutes, maybe 20 at most. It hadn't felt that long. I looked back at the light. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not a shape, just a distortion, like something shifting behind it. Then it was gone. The light pulsed again, stronger this time. The pressure in my ears peaked. Then everything snapped back. The radio came on suddenly, loud enough to make me flinch. The interior lights brightened. The air felt normal again. I blinked. The reflection in the window showed nothing. No light, just the dark road behind us. I looked out the rear window again. Still nothing. The driver spoke for the first time in a while. "Nearly there," he said. His voice sounded normal, like nothing had happened. A minute later, we pulled up outside my house. The car stopped. I sat there for a second, trying to process it. Then I reached for my wallet. The fare meter caught my eye. I froze. The distance was wrong, way off. It showed nearly double what the route should have been. I looked at the time again, 1:26. I stared at it. There was no way the drive had taken that long. It hadn't felt like more than 20 minutes. I looked at the driver. He didn't seem concerned. Just waited, hand resting on the wheel. A bit higher than usual, I said, nodding toward the meter. He shrugged. That's what it says. I paid him. Didn't argue. Got out of the car. The night air felt sharp and normal. I stood there for a second, watching the taxi pull away. As it turned the corner, I looked at the rear window one last time. There was nothing following it. Just the car, disappearing down the street. I went inside, checked my phone again. The time hadn't changed. 1:27. I stood in the hallway for a while, trying to remember the drive, the turns we took, the roads we passed. But there were gaps, whole stretches I couldn't account for, like pieces had been skipped over. I haven't taken a taxi that late since, not on my own. The power went out without any warning. I was in the kitchen when it happened, just rinsing a mug. No flicker, no dimming. Everything just cut at once. The hum of the fridge, the overhead light, even the little clock on the microwave went dead in the same instant. My name's Stefan. I live in a coastal town, nothing too remote, but storms roll in fast sometimes. So at first, I just assumed it was weather. But there wasn't any. I stood there for a second, waiting for that usual follow-up, wind picking up, rain starting something. Nothing came. The house felt too quiet. Not just because the electricity was gone. It was like the outside had gone quiet too. No cars, no distant sounds, not even the low background noise you don't normally notice until it disappears. I dried my hands and walked to the front room. The windows looked darker than they should have been. Normally, even at night, there's some kind of glow from streetlights or houses down the road, but this was just flat darkness. I grabbed my phone off the table, no signal, not even a flicker of it, trying to connect. That was the first thing that made me pause. Power cuts happen. Losing signal at the exact same time doesn't, at least not where I live. I moved toward the front door and opened it. The air outside was still. Not cold, not warm, just still. The street was completely dark. No porch lights, no passing headlights, nothing. Every house looked dead. I stepped out onto the path and looked up. That's when I saw it. At first, I didn't even understand what I was looking at. There was a faint glow in the clouds. Not spread out like normal light, not coming from a single point either. It was a ring, a soft circular shape just barely visible against the low cloud cover. It wasn't bright. If anything, it was more like the clouds inside the circle were slightly lighter than the ones around it. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. It didn't move, didn't expand, just sat there, perfectly still. I stepped further out into the street. The ground felt slightly damp under my shoes, but there was no rain falling. I kept my eyes on the ring. It was hard to judge the size. It could have been huge. It felt like it stretched across a big portion of the sky, but without anything to compare it to, I couldn't tell. I looked around, expecting to see someone else outside. A neighbor, maybe. But every house was dark. No movement anywhere. I listened. Nothing. No wind through the trees, no distant engines, just that quiet pressing in from all sides. I looked back up. The ring was still there, unchanged. I took a few steps down the road, trying to get a different angle. It didn't matter. It looked exactly the same, centered, still. The clouds around it drifted slightly, but the shape of the ring didn't shift with them. It stayed fixed, like it wasn't part of the clouds at all. I felt something in my ears, a slight pressure, like when you're in an elevator and it moves too fast. I swallowed. The pressure stayed. I stood there breathing slowly, trying to stay calm. The ring didn't react to anything. It didn't pulse, didn't flicker, just existed. Then, after what felt like a long time, though it couldn't have been more than a minute or two, it started to fade. Not expand, not move, just dim. The contrast between the inside of the ring and the rest of the clouds slowly evened out. The edges softened. The shape became harder to see. I leaned forward slightly, trying to keep it in view, but it kept fading until it was just normal cloud cover again. No trace of the circle. I stood there for a few more seconds, staring at the same spot, waiting for it to come back. Nothing did. Then, almost immediately after it disappeared, a distant sound came back. A car, somewhere far off. Then another, a faint rustle of wind through the trees. The normal background noise returned, piece by piece. I felt the pressure in my ears ease. I turned back toward the house. As I stepped inside, the power came back on. Lights flicked up, the fridge hummed to life. The microwave clock reset to blinking zeros. Everything looked normal again. I walked back to the front room window and looked out. The streetlights were on. A house down the road had their porch light glowing. Nothing looked out of place. I stepped outside again, just to be sure. Looked up. The clouds were still there. Same low cover, same night sky, but no ring. Nothing even close to it. I stood there for a while, trying to piece together what I'd just seen. But nothing fit. Not the timing, not the way the clouds had behaved, and not how the entire area seemed to go quiet at the same time. Eventually, I went back inside. Everything in the house worked fine. No signs anything had been wrong. But every time there's a power cut now, even a quick one, I catch myself going to the door. Looking up, half expecting to see that same faint circle in the clouds again, just sitting there. Perfectly still, waiting to fade out like it was never there at all. I didn't think anything of it at first because the footage looked like a glitch. It was just a flicker, half a second at most, then a jump forward in the timestamp, maybe 3 seconds missing. The kind of thing I'd seen before when the camera lagged or the Wi-Fi dropped. I only checked it because of what Jenna said. She lives 2 doors down. Early 40s, always outside doing something, watering plants, taking bins in, that kind of thing. Not the type to make things up. She caught me in the morning while I was getting into my car. "Hey," she said, a bit hesitant. "Were you home last night?" "Yeah," I said. "Why?" She glanced up at my roof, then back at me. "I thought I saw something. Around, I don't know, maybe 11:30? Lights. Just above your house." I shrugged slightly. "Probably a drone or something." She shook her head immediately. "No, it wasn't moving like that. It was just there, for a bit." Something about the way she said it made me pause. "That, like hovering?" I asked. "Yeah," she said, "but not high, just above the roofline. And it didn't light anything up. That's what was weird." I didn't have an answer for that. "Did it make any noise?" I asked. She shook her head again. "Nothing. I only noticed because I was taking the bins out and saw the glow. Then it just went." I nodded slowly, not really knowing what to say. "I've got a camera out front," I said. "I'll check it later." She gave a small, relieved smile, like she was glad I didn't brush her off completely. "Yeah. Just tell me if you see anything, all right?" "Sure." I got in the car and left it at that. All day, I didn't think about it much, just assumed it was something explainable, light reflection, someone's drone, anything like that. That night, I remembered. I opened the app for the security camera while I was sitting on the couch. It's just a basic setup, covers the front of the house and part of the street. I scrolled back to around 11:30, found the timestamp, played it. The footage looked normal. Empty street, my car parked out front, no movement. Then, right at 11:32, a flicker. Not bright, just a slight shift in the image, like the exposure changed for a split second. Then it cut forward. 11:32:14 to 11:30:17. 3 seconds gone. I rewound it, played it again, same thing. No visible source for the flicker, no light appearing in frame, just that brief distortion. Then the jump. I leaned forward, staring at the screen. Paused it just before the flicker. Everything looked normal. I advanced frame by frame. The flicker wasn't even a full frame, more like a blur. Then the timestamp skipped. I checked the rest of the footage. Nothing else unusual. No lights, no movement, no sign of anything hovering above. I sat back, frowning. It didn't match what Jenna described it. If something had been above the house, even faintly, the camera should have picked up something, even a reflection. But there was nothing, just that flicker. I checked the camera settings. Everything looked fine. No recorded connection drop, no error logs, just that small gap in the recording. I closed the app and sat there for a bit. The house was quiet, no sounds outside, no cars passing, just that still, late-night silence. After a while, I opened the app again, went back to the same clip, watched it one more time. This time I noticed something I hadn't before. Right before the flicker, the image shifted slightly. Not enough to be obvious, but the alignment of the frame changed, like the camera had moved a fraction of an inch. Then the flicker, then the skip, then everything back to normal. I leaned in closer to the screen, Tried to see if there was any shadow movement, anything at all. Nothing, just the same empty street. I stood up and went to the front door, opened it, stepped outside. The night felt normal, cool air, faint distant noise. I looked up at the roofline, nothing, no lights, no glow. I walked a few steps into the street and looked up again. Still nothing. I stood there for a minute or two, just scanning the sky. Then I went back inside, closed the door, checked the footage again. Same result. I went to bed, but I didn't fall asleep right away. Kept thinking about what Jenna had said, how she described it. Low, hovering, not lighting anything around it, and how the camera showed nothing except that brief disturbance. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember, it was morning. I checked the footage again before leaving for work, scrolled through the night. Everything looked normal. No more flickers, no more missing frames, just that one moment. When I stepped outside, Jenna was already out front. She looked at me expectantly. "Well?" she asked. I hesitated for a second. "Nothing clear," I said. "Just a small glitch in the footage. Couple seconds missing." Her expression tightened slightly. "Nothing else? No lights? Nothing visible?" She looked up at my roof again. "I know what I saw," she said quietly. I nodded. "I'm not saying you didn't." She didn't respond. Just stood there for a moment longer, then turned and went back inside. I got in my car and sat there for a second before starting it. Something about it didn't sit right. Not the idea that she saw something, but how it lined up with the footage. That flicker, the slight shift in the frame, and those missing seconds. It didn't look like something passing in front of the camera. It looked more like the camera itself had been affected. Like for those few seconds, whatever she saw wasn't just above the house, but close enough or aligned in a way that the camera couldn't record it properly, only react to it, then skip past it entirely, as if those moments couldn't be captured at all. I used to cut across the school field on my way home from late shifts. It saved maybe 10 minutes compared to sticking to the roads, and after a while, you stop thinking about how empty it is at night. It was a secondary school, big open playing field with a fence around most of it, but there's a gap near the corner where people have pushed through over the years. That's where I always went in. That night it was dry, cold, and completely still. No wind, no rain, just that quiet you get when everything's settled. It was a little after midnight. The houses around the field had their lights off for the most part, and the school building itself was dark. I climbed through the gap in the fence and stepped onto the grass. It felt normal underfoot. Slightly damp, but nothing unusual. I had my phone in my pocket, no music, just walking. You could hear the faint sound of the main road in the distance, but it was far enough away that it didn't carry much. I'd crossed that field dozens of times. There's a worn path that cuts diagonally from one corner to the opposite side. I stuck to that, more out of habit than anything. About halfway across, I noticed the light. It wasn't obvious at first, just a faint change in how the grass looked ahead of me. A patch that seemed slightly brighter than the rest. I slowed down. At first, I thought maybe it was a security light from the school building hitting at a weird angle. But when I looked toward the building, everything there was dark. I kept walking. As I got closer, the light became clearer. It was a wide patch, maybe 10 or 12 feet across, sitting right over the grass. Pale, almost white, but soft. Not harsh or focused like a spotlight. The edges weren't sharp, they just faded into the surrounding darkness. I stopped a few steps away from it. The rest of the field looked normal. Dark, flat, empty. This one patch looked like it was being lit from above. I glanced up. Nothing, just the sky. Clouded over, no stars visible, no streetlights nearby that could have reached that far. I took a step closer. The grass inside the light looked slightly different. Not in color, just in texture, like it was being pressed down gently, even though there was no wind. I stepped into it. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. It was warmer. Not by a lot, but enough that it stood out against the cold air around it, like stepping into a room that's been heated slightly. I paused. My breath didn't show as much in front of me. The air felt thicker, not hard to breathe, just different. I took another step further in. The light didn't change. It stayed steady, evenly covering the ground. I held my hands out slightly, more out of instinct than anything. That's when I felt it, a faint tingling. At first, I thought it was just from the cold, like when your fingers start to warm up again, but it wasn't quite that. It was more even, running across my fingertips, then up into my palms. I rubbed my hands together. The feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. I looked down at the grass. For a second, I thought I saw something shift beneath it. Not moving, just deeper. Like the surface wasn't solid in the way it should have been. I blinked. It looked normal again. The tingling spread slightly up my wrists, not painful, just enough to make me aware of it. The air around me felt heavier. My ears popped. Sharp. I swallowed, but the pressure lingered. The rest of the field had gone quiet. I hadn't noticed when it happened, but now it was obvious. No distant traffic, no wind, nothing. Just me standing in that patch of light. I took a step back. The moment I crossed the edge, the temperature dropped again. The cold air hit me properly. The tingling in my hands didn't stop, but it eased slightly. I turned around and looked at the patch. It was still there, unchanged, sitting in the middle of the field like it didn't belong. For a second, I thought about stepping back in just to see if anything else would happen, but something in me said not to. I stayed where I was. The light pulsed once, subtle, barely noticeable. But enough. My ears popped again. The pressure returned for a second, then faded. I took another step back. Then another. I kept my eyes on it as I moved toward the far side of the field. The patch stayed where it was. No movement, no change, just that steady glow. I didn't turn my back on it until I reached the fence on the other side. I climbed through and stepped onto the pavement. When I looked back, the field was dark, no light, no patch, just empty grass. I stood there for a second, trying to adjust to the normal darkness. The sounds came back gradually. Distant cars, a dog barking somewhere, the usual background noise. I checked my phone, 12:48. I frowned. I'd entered the field around 12:15. It shouldn't have taken more than 10 minutes to cross. Even stopping, it didn't feel like more than a few minutes. I walked the rest of the way home, rubbing my hands together. The tingling stayed for a while, faded slowly, like it was working its way out rather than stopping all at once. When I got home, I went straight to the sink and ran my hands under warm water. They looked normal. No marks, no redness, just normal. But the feeling lingered, faintly, for the rest of the night. The next day, I passed the field again in daylight. Nothing there, just grass. Flat, slightly worn where people walk across it. No sign of anything unusual. I still cut across sometimes, but I don't walk through the middle anymore. I stay closer to the edge. And if I see anything on the ground that looks even slightly out of place, I go around it. I leave for work at the same time every morning. 5:10, give or take a minute. It's early enough that the roads are mostly empty, especially where I live. Edge of an industrial estate with long stretches of warehouses and fenced yards. It was late February, still dark at that hour. Not pitch black, but that deep pre-dawn blue where everything looks flat and slightly off. No frost that morning, just cold and dry. I'd driven that route so many times I didn't really think about it anymore. Same turns, same timing. There's a stretch about 10 minutes in where the road runs alongside a row of industrial yards, big fenced-off lots with stacked pallets, containers, that sort of thing. Normally, it's dead quiet. No lights except the occasional security lamp. That morning, I noticed something different before I even reached the yard. The radio cut out. Not completely, just dropped to a low hiss for a second, then came back. I glanced at the dashboard, thinking maybe I'd brushed the volume or something. Everything looked normal. I kept driving. A few seconds later, it happened again. This time the dashboard lights dimmed slightly at the same time. Not off, just dipped. Like the power had been pulled back for a second. Then everything returned to normal. I frowned, tapped the steering wheel lightly. The car's not new, but it's never had electrical issues. I slowed a little, just in case. As I came up alongside the first yard, I saw the light. It was low, much lower than anything that should have been in the air, hovering just above the fence line, maybe 10 feet up, sitting over the center of the yard. At first, I thought it was one of those portable work lights, the kind they set up on sites, but this wasn't fixed to the ground. It was just there. A soft white glow, not harsh, but bright enough to clearly outline the tops of the containers beneath it. No beam, no source I could see. Just a solid, contained light. I slowed further, my foot easing off the accelerator without really thinking about it. The road was empty. No cars behind me, none coming the other way. I glanced at the yard itself. No movement. No workers, no vehicles. Just that light, hovering in place. Then the dashboard dimmed again. More noticeably this time, the radio dropped to silence. Not static, nothing. The engine kept running, but it sounded distant, like it was coming from further away than it should have. I tightened my grip onto the wheel. The air inside the car felt heavier, not stuffy, just thick. My ears popped. I swallowed, but the pressure stayed. I looked back at the light. It hadn't moved, but it felt closer. Not physically, not in distance, just more present. Like it was pushing into the space around it. The edges of it looked strange. Not sharp, like not blurred. More like the air around it was shifting slightly, bending in a way that didn't match the rest of the scene. I realized I was drifting toward the edge of the road and corrected the wheel. The steering felt slightly delayed, like there was a fraction of a second between input and response. I eased off the gas completely. The car slowed, rolling forward. The dashboard lights dimmed again, lower this time. The digital clock flickered. For a second, it showed nothing at all, then came back. I glanced at it. 5:22. That didn't seem right. I'd left at 5:10. The yard was about 10 minutes away, but it hadn't felt like 12 minutes had passed. It had felt like 5. I looked back up at the light. For a second, I thought I saw something beneath it, not clearly, just a darker shape, like a shadow where there shouldn't be one. Then it shifted, or I blinked, and it was gone. The light pulsed once. Subtle, but enough to notice. The pressure in my ears increased, sharp enough that I winced. My fingers tingled on the wheel. The car kept rolling forward, slow, steady. I remember thinking I should stop, just pull over, figure out what was happening. But I didn't. I just kept moving. The light stayed where it was. The road curved slightly, bringing me alongside it for a moment longer. Then, everything snapped back. The radio came on full volume for a split second before settling. The dashboard lights brightened, the engine sounded normal again. I blinked. The yard was dark. No light, no glow, nothing. Just the fence, the containers, and the usual security lamp near the gate. I straightened up in my seat. The road ahead looked normal. I drove on, a bit faster now, trying to shake the feeling. A few minutes later, something didn't feel right. The landmarks were off. The turn I usually take, the one that leads toward the motorway, should have been coming up. It wasn't. I kept driving. Another minute passed. Then I saw a sign, one I recognized, but it was further along the route than I should have been. I slowed down, heart starting to pick up. I checked the clock. 5:47. I stared at it. There was no way. I should have been on the motorway by then, halfway to work. Instead, I'd missed my exit completely. I didn't remember passing it. I didn't remember any of the road between the yard and where I was now. I pulled over onto the side of the road and sat there, engine idling. Everything inside the car was normal again. No dimming, no silence, just the usual hum. I looked back in the direction I'd come from. Nothing there. Just the road stretching back into the dark. I sat there for a few minutes trying to piece it together, but there was nothing to grab onto. No gap I could feel. No moment where things went blank. Just that light. And then being further down the road than I should have been. Eventually I turned around and drove back to the exit I'd missed. I made it to work late. I didn't mention any of it. But now, every time I pass that stretch of road before sunrise, I slow down a little and I look at that yard. Just in case the light's there again. I was sitting by the fire when everything went quiet. Not gradually, all at once. 1 second there were insects, constant, layered noise like there always is in the woods at night, and then nothing. It cut off so clean it felt wrong. I remember looking up immediately, like I expected to see something that caused it. There was nothing, just trees, shadows, and the fire in front of me. I was camping alone, about an hour hike in from the nearest road. It was a spot my friend Jonah had shown me a couple of years back. Small clearing, decent ground for a tent, and far enough out that you don't get anyone passing through. I'd gotten there in the late afternoon, set everything up, and had a fire going by sunset. Everything had been normal, quiet but in the usual way. That constant background of insects, occasional rustle in the trees, the kind of noise you stop noticing after a while, until it stopped. I sat there, staring into the fire for a second, trying to process it. Then I became aware of how loud the silence was. Not just quiet, empty. I turned my head slowly, listening. No insects, no wind. Even the leaves seemed still. The fire popped once and it sounded too sharp, too clear. I stood up without really thinking, looked around the edge of the clearing. Nothing moved. The trees stood dark and still, branches barely visible against the sky. I took a few steps away from the fire, trying to listen deeper into the woods. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the temperature. It had dropped. Not drastically, but enough that I felt it immediately, like stepping into shade after being in the sun, except it was night. I rubbed my arms without thinking. Then I heard something, not a sound exactly, more like a shift. I turned toward it, to the right side of the clearing where the trees were closer together. At first, I didn't see anything. Then something moved, not like an animal. It wasn't solid, it was more like the air itself had shifted. A faint shimmer, like heat haze, but in the dark. It passed between two trees, not quickly, just smoothly. I stared at it, trying to focus. It didn't have a clear shape, just a distortion, like something bending the space around it. I took a step back toward the fire. The shimmer moved again, still between the trees, slightly further in now. I couldn't hear it. No footsteps, no branches snapping, nothing. Just that movement. The silence around me pressed in harder. I realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. The fire crackled behind me, but it felt distant, like it wasn't part of the same space. I took another step back. The shimmer paused, not stopped, just less noticeable, like it was blending in. Then it moved again. This time, slightly closer to the edge of the clearing, still not entering it, just staying between the trees. I tried to tell myself it was just my eyes adjusting, light from the fire playing tricks, but the way it moved didn't match that. It had direction. I backed up another step, closer to the fire now. The warmth hit me again, but it didn't feel as strong as it should have. The shimmer faded slightly, not gone, just harder to see. I kept my eyes on that spot, waiting. Nothing moved for a few seconds. Then it passed again, from left to right this time. Slightly higher, like it had shifted position without me noticing. I felt that tightness in my chest again. Not panic, just that sense that something wasn't right. I looked around the rest of the clearing. Everything else was still, no movement anywhere, no sound. I looked back. The shimmer was gone, completely. The space between the trees looked normal again. Again. Dark. Empty. I stayed there, watching, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. Then, slowly, the insects started again. Not all at once. A few at first. Then, more, until the normal noise filled the space again, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a while longer, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Eventually, I sat back down by the fire, kept glancing up, checking the tree line. Nothing moved, everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The silence had been too complete, the movement too deliberate. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I'd missed something. At one point, maybe an hour later, the insects stopped again. Briefly, just for a few seconds. I opened my eyes immediately, sat up, listened. Nothing. Then they started again. I didn't see the shimmer that time, but I didn't relax. When morning came, everything felt normal again. The woods sounded like they should. Birds, insects, wind through the trees. I packed up early, didn't stay as long as I planned. On the hike back, I kept looking off into the trees, half expecting to see that distortion again. But I didn't. Everything looked solid, clear, normal. I've been back to that spot once since, with Jonah. During the day, nothing unusual happened, but I noticed something. The area where I'd seen the shimmer, the trees there felt different. Not visibly, just in the way the space between them looked, like my eyes didn't settle on it the same way. I didn't mention it. We stayed for a few hours and left before it got dark. I haven't gone back at night since, and sometimes when it gets really quiet outside, I notice how much sound is usually there and how wrong it felt when it wasn't. I noticed the compass before I noticed anything in the sky. I was about halfway along a ridge trail in the San Juan Mountains, a little outside Silverton. It was late afternoon, maybe around 6:30, and the sun was already dropping behind the peaks. The air was cooler up there, thin and dry, with that faint metallic smell you sometimes get in high elevation. I'd hiked that trail before. Not often, but enough to know it well. The ridge runs narrow for a stretch, with a steep drop on one side and a gradual slope on the other. The path itself is easy to follow, just packed dirt and loose rock. I had my phone out because I was checking how much farther I had to go before turning back. That's when I noticed the compass. It wasn't pointing straight north. Not exactly. It was off by just a little. At first, I thought it was just calibration. Phones do that sometimes. I held it flat, moved it in a figure eight, tried to reset it. The needle steadied, but it didn't correct. It stayed slightly off, not spinning, not erratic, just wrong. I frowned and looked around. There was nothing nearby that should interfere with it. No metal structures, no power lines, just rock, dirt, and scattered trees lower down the slope. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking. A few steps later, I felt something else. A faint pressure. Not in my ears exactly, more like in my head. Like the moment before a headache, but without the pain. I stopped and stood still. The wind had died down. The ridge felt unusually quiet. I reached for my phone again and checked the compass. Still off. Same slight angle. I turned my body slowly, watching the needle. It responded to my movement, but it never lined up perfectly. Always just a few degrees off. I looked up at the horizon. The sun was nearly gone now, just a faint glow behind the mountains. The sky above it was darker, shifting toward blue-gray. That's when I saw it. A dim glow just above the horizon line. It was faint enough that I almost missed it. Not bright like a light source, more like a soft patch of illumination in the air. I stood there, staring at it. The glow didn't spread, didn't move. It just sat there, hovering above the distant peaks. I tried to tell myself it was the last of the sunlight catching something. A cloud, maybe. But there weren't any clouds. The sky had been clear all afternoon. I took a step forward. The gravel shifted under my boot. The glow stayed in place. Then it pulsed, just once. A brief increase in brightness. Not sharp, not sudden. More like it swelled slightly, then returned to its original dim state. I felt that pressure in my head again, stronger this time. I swallowed, trying to clear it. It didn't help. I looked down at my phone. The compass needle had moved. Not much, but more off than before. I turned slowly, watching it. The needle lagged behind my movement for a second, then caught up, but it still didn't settle correctly. I looked back up at the glow. It hadn't moved. The color was hard to pin down. Not white, not yellow. Something in between, but muted. Like it was being filtered through something. The air around me felt still. Too still. No wind, no sound. Even the faint rustle of leaves from below the ridge had stopped. I took another step forward. The glow didn't react. I waited. Nothing changed. Then, slowly, it began to fade. Not disappearing all at once, just becoming less noticeable. Like my eyes were losing the ability to see it. Within a few seconds, it was gone. The horizon looked normal again, just the dark outline of mountains against the sky. I stood there for a moment, trying to process it. Then I looked down at my phone again. The compass needle snapped back to normal, perfectly aligned. I turned in a full circle. It stayed steady, exactly where it should be. The pressure in my head eased, not instantly, but gradually. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. The wind picked up again, lightly brushing against my jacket. I could hear it moving through the trees below. Everything felt normal. I checked the time, 7:02 p.m. That made me pause. I was sure it had been closer to 6:40 when I first noticed the compass. It didn't feel like I'd been standing there that long. I tried to think back. How long I'd been watching the glow, how long the needle had been off. It didn't add up. I stood there for another minute looking out over the horizon. Nothing else appeared. No light, no movement. Just the fading twilight. Eventually, I turned around and started heading back down the trail. The path felt familiar again, solid under my feet. But every few steps, I found myself checking my phone, watching the compass, making sure it stayed aligned. It did, all the way down. When I reached my car at the trailhead, I sat there for a minute before starting the engine. I pulled my phone out one more time. The compass was still steady, pointing exactly north. I set it down on the passenger seat and looked up at the ridge. The sky above it was completely dark now. No glow, no movement. But for a second, I thought I saw something faint. A small shift in the darkness above the horizon. Then, it was gone. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I first noticed it. Not in the room. My eyes were closed. At first I thought it was just one of those random flashes you get sometimes when you're tired. Little bits of light behind your eyelids, like your brain misfiring as you drift off. But this was different. It didn't flash. It built. Slowly. A faint glow, like something distant getting closer. I remember keeping my eyes closed on purpose, just to see what it would do. The light wasn't a color I could name properly. Not bright white, not yellow. Something softer, but still clear enough that I could tell it wasn't just darkness anymore. It spread evenly across my vision, like it wasn't coming from one direction. Just everywhere. I frowned a bit, still lying there, trying to decide if I was imagining it. Then it got brighter. Not suddenly, gradually, like something increasing in intensity over time. I opened my eyes. The room was completely dark. Exactly how it should have been. The curtains were shut, no light from outside, no glow from electronics except the faint numbers on my clock. I blinked a couple of times, letting my eyes adjust. Nothing unusual. I lay there for a second, waiting for the glow to come back. It didn't. I turned my head slightly and looked at the clock. 2:11 a.m. That seemed about right. I'd gone to bed maybe 20 minutes earlier. I rolled onto my side and closed my eyes again. At first, there was nothing, just darkness. Then, slowly, it started again, that same faint glow. Building. I kept my eyes closed, paying closer attention this time. It didn't pulse, didn't flicker, it just increased. Steady. I noticed something else. There was no sense of direction to it. It wasn't like light coming from the left or right. It felt like it was behind everything. Flat. Even. I shifted slightly in bed just to see if movement changed anything. It didn't. The glow continued to build, a bit brighter than before. I opened my eyes again. The room was still completely dark, no change at all. I pushed myself up slightly, leaning on one elbow. Checked the room more carefully this time. The door was closed. No light bleeding in from the hallway. The window was the same as before. Nothing outside. I checked the clock again. 2:17. I froze for a second. That didn't make sense. I was sure it hadn't been that long. It felt like maybe a minute or two since I last checked. Not 6. I stared at the numbers for a bit, waiting to see if they'd jump or correct themselves. They didn't. I sat there, trying to think back. I didn't remember falling asleep. Didn't remember drifting off. I'd been aware the whole time, or at least it felt that way. I lay back down slowly. My chest felt slightly tight, not from fear exactly, just from how focused I'd gotten. I closed my eyes again. Darkness. For a few seconds. Then the glow returned. Stronger this time. It didn't start as faint, it was already there, just below the level where I'd opened my eyes before. I stayed still, watching it. It kept building. I noticed that my breathing had slowed without me meaning to, like my body had adjusted to something. The glow grew brighter. Not blinding, but enough that it felt unnatural. I had this strong urge to open my eyes again, but I didn't. I wanted to see how far it would go. The brightness reached a point where it felt like it should be lighting the room, but I knew it wasn't, because I wasn't seeing it when my eyes were open. That's what didn't sit right. It was only there when I wasn't looking directly at it. I opened my eyes suddenly. Dark, same as before. No light anywhere. I sat up fully this time. Checked the clock again. 2:29. I felt a drop in my stomach. There was no way that much time had passed. I hadn't moved, hadn't fallen asleep, at least not that I remembered. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The room felt normal. No strange temperature, no sounds. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. Outside looked normal. Empty street. No lights except the distant glow from a street lamp further down. I let the curtain fall back into place. Then I noticed something else. The clock. I looked at it again. 2:29. The seconds weren't moving. I stepped closer. They stayed frozen. I reached out and tapped it lightly. Nothing. Then suddenly it changed. 2:30. The seconds started moving again. I stood there for a second, watching it tick. Everything seemed normal again. I went back to the bed and sat down. I didn't lie back immediately. I just sat there, trying to piece together what had happened. Then, without thinking, I closed my eyes again. The glow was still there. Not building anymore. Just present. Faint, like it had settled into the background. I opened my eyes immediately. Dark. I didn't close them again after that. I stayed sitting up for a while, watching the clock. The time moved normally. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I lay back down, but I kept my eyes open. I must have fallen asleep at some point after that. When I woke up in the morning, everything felt normal. The room looked the same. The clock was working fine. But when I thought back to it, I realized something I couldn't explain. I couldn't remember exactly when the glow had been the brightest. There wasn't a clear point where it peaked, just a sense that it had reached something. And I hadn't seen it when it did. I saw the glow before I realized how quiet everything had gotten. It was just after 10 p.m., and I was driving down a 2-lane road outside of Salina, Kansas, heading back home after visiting my friend Lucas. The road runs through miles of farmland, mostly corn and wheat, with long stretches where there's nothing but fields on both sides. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk show fading in and out as I got farther from town. At some point, I noticed the signal had dropped completely. The radio didn't fade, it just went silent. No static, no voices, just nothing. I reached over and tapped the screen, thinking maybe I'd accidentally muted it. The display was still on, showing the station, but there was no sound. I frowned and glanced up at the road. That's when I saw it. A soft red glow hovering just above the crops on the right side of the road. It was faint at first, barely noticeable against the darkness. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It hung maybe 10 feet above the tops of the corn, casting a dull red tint over a small patch of the field. Not bright enough to light everything up, just enough to make the stalks underneath it look darker and slightly red. I eased off the gas. The tires hummed against the asphalt. The glow stayed in place. At first, I thought it might be a piece of farm equipment with a light on, but there was no structure around it, no barn, no tractor, just the field stretching out into the dark. I slowed down more, almost to a crawl. The glow didn't flicker, didn't move, just hovered. I rolled down my window halfway. The night air was still and warm, no wind, no insects. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Out there, you always hear something at night. Crickets, frogs, wind in the crops. But now there was nothing. I leaned slightly toward the open window, listening. Nothing. The glow remained steady. I drove a little farther, bringing the car nearly alongside it. Now I could see it more clearly. It wasn't a beam or a spotlight. It was more like a small cloud of light, evenly distributed, with no visible source. The edges were soft, blending into the darkness around it. I tapped the brake and let the car roll to a stop. The engine idled quietly. The glow hovered maybe 20 yards off the road. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I noticed something else. My headlights didn't seem to reach it properly. The beams stopped short, like they were dimming before they touched the glow. The corn between me and the light looked darker than it should have been. I felt that same tightness in my chest again. I didn't want to get out of the car, but I also didn't want to drive past it without looking a little closer. I opened the door halfway and stepped 1 foot onto the road. The gravel crunched under my shoe. The glow didn't react. It stayed perfectly still. I stepped fully out of the car and stood there, the door still open behind me. The engine continued to idle. The headlights cast a narrow path across the road and into the field, but the red glow seemed untouched by it. I took a few steps toward the ditch. The grass along the roadside brushed against my legs. The glow stayed in place. I stopped at the edge of the ditch and looked out over the crops. The red light hovered there, silent and steady. Then it moved, not sideways, not toward me, up. It lifted straight upward, smooth, even. No change in brightness, no flicker, just a steady rise. I froze. The glow climbed above the height of the corn, then above the nearby fence posts. It kept going. Slowly at first, then a little faster. Still no sound. Still no change in intensity. It rose above the field until it was level with the top of the trees in the distance, then higher. I tilted my head back to keep it in view. The glow remained the same dull red, not getting dimmer or brighter as it climbed. That part didn't make sense. Anything moving that far away should change in brightness. This didn't. It just stayed the same. Then it reached a point where it was almost directly above me. For a moment it paused. I held my breath. The silence around me felt heavier than before. Then the glow shot upward. Not gradually. Not like before. Faster. Straight up. Within a second it was high above the field. Within 2 seconds it was just a small red point against the black sky. Then it vanished. No fading. No streak. Just gone. The moment it disappeared, the sound came back. Crickets. wind through the corn, the distant hum of a truck on the highway. I stood there for a few seconds, still staring at the sky. Nothing else moved, no other lights, no aircraft, just stars. I slowly walked back to the car and got in. The radio came back on by itself. Mid-sentence, like it had never stopped. I checked the clock on the dashboard, 10:58 p.m. I stared at it for a second. That didn't seem right. I was sure it had been closer to 10:40 when I first saw the glow. I couldn't account for the time. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping again. But when I passed another stretch of farmland about 10 minutes later, I found myself looking out over the fields. Just in case, everything looked normal. Dark. Empty. But I kept thinking about how the glow hadn't changed at all as it rose, like distance didn't matter to it. And when I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, I noticed the red tint lingering faintly in my vision, as if I'd been staring at it longer than I thought. The grain silos stopped vibrating before the sky shifted. I worked nights at a grain elevator outside a small farming town in western Nebraska. During harvest season, the place ran almost non-stop during the day, but overnight it was mostly quiet. My job was just to watch the conveyor systems, keep an eye on the storage levels, and make sure nothing jammed or overheated. My name's Kevin Dalton. Most of my shift was spent in a small control office that overlooked the silos and the loading tracks where freight trains came through during the day. It was around 2:14 a.m. when the vibrations stopped. The grain silos normally hummed constantly. Fans ran to circulate air through the stored grain, and the massive steel cylinders always carried a faint vibration through the ground. But that night, the vibration vanished all at once. I noticed it because the coffee in my mug stopped rippling on the desk. The hum from the ventilation motors dropped lower. Then, the digital readouts on the control panel flickered. For a second, all the numbers went blank. I stood up and looked out the office window. The wind had died. The wheat fields surrounding the elevator were perfectly still. Even the tall grass along the gravel road wasn't moving. Then I noticed the sky above the silos. A wide section of stars looked distorted, not hidden by clouds, bent. The light from them curved inward toward the center of a massive invisible shape drifting slowly across the sky. The distortion moved above the row of silos. As it passed overhead, the metal structures began making faint ticking sounds. The long catwalk that connected the silos creaked softly. The distortion stopped directly above the elevator. For a moment, the entire yard lit up. Not bright like floodlights, just a pale glow spreading across the silos and the gravel yard. The shadows of the metal towers stretched across the ground. Then the glow vanished. The distortion shot across the sky faster than anything I'd ever seen and disappeared beyond the flat horizon. The wind returned instantly. The wheat fields began rustling again. The ventilation fans roared back to full speed. The vibration returned through the ground beneath the silos. Everything went back to normal, except for the car. A black sedan sat parked beside the gravel road leading to the elevator entrance. I hadn't heard it arrive. Two men stood beside it. Both wore black suits, white shirts, black ties. No jackets, even though the prairie air had turned cold again. One of them was tall with dark hair combed straight back. The other had a broader build and pale skin that looked almost gray under the yard lights. They were looking up at the silos. The tall one walked toward me. "You observed the passage," he said. It wasn't phrased like a question. "Yeah," I replied slowly. "What was that thing?" The shorter man glanced up toward the sky. "A transit object," he said. "That thing bent the stars." Yes, the way he said it made my stomach tighten. "So, you know what it was?" Neither of them confirmed it. Instead, the tall man looked across the grain yard. "You also noticed the mechanical interruption," he said. "The fans stopped." "That's common during those events." "For what events?" He didn't answer. The shorter man stepped closer to one of the silos and tapped the steel wall lightly with his knuckle. "You're the only operator on site tonight," he said. "How do you know that?" "We checked the elevator staffing records." That response made me uneasy. "You guys from the grain company?" I asked. "No." "Military?" "No." "Then who are you?" The tall man paused before answering. "We observe unusual crossings." "Crossings of what?" He looked up toward the sky again. "Things that move through this region." "That's not helpful." It's accurate. The wind pushed across the wheat fields again, making the stalk whisper softly. I looked back toward the horizon where the distortion had vanished. So what exactly flew over this place? The two men exchanged a quick glance. Then the shorter one said quietly, "Something traveling far beyond this land." The tall man stepped back toward the sedan. "You should log the fan interruption as routine electrical interference," he said. "That's not what caused it. It will be the explanation that remains." I crossed my arms. "What happens if that thing comes back?" He paused before getting into the car. Then he said softly, "It doesn't repeat the same crossing." Both men got into the sedan. The engine started quietly. As the car rolled down the gravel road away from the elevator, the shorter man lowered the window. "You lost about 40 seconds during the passage," he said. "I was standing here the whole time." Time compresses near certain events. The sedan disappeared into the dark prairie road. Later that morning, when I checked the system logs, the ventilation fans had shut down for exactly 40 seconds. But according to the control panel timestamp, that interruption started almost a full minute before the fans ever stopped spinning. I saw the light before I heard anything unusual. I was about halfway down Oakridge Lane, walking home from a late shift at the grocery store. It was just after 11 p.m., and the neighborhood was quiet. In that way it gets when everyone's already inside and the TVs are on low behind closed windows. The streetlights along that road aren't very bright. They leave long patches of shadow between them, especially near the older houses where the trees hang low over the sidewalks. I'd walked that route 100 times. That's why it stood out immediately. There was a pale light sitting low between two houses about 30 yards ahead. At first I thought it was someone's porch light bleeding through a gap in the fence, but it wasn't attached to anything. It just hung there, about 5 feet off the ground. Soft white, not harsh or yellow like a normal bulb. More like a dull glow, almost like fog lit from within. I slowed down a little. The houses on either side of it were dark. No lights in the windows, no movement. The light didn't flicker, didn't sway. It just stayed perfectly still in the narrow space between the two properties. I stopped walking. For a few seconds, I just stood there staring at it. The air felt cool, slightly damp, like it might rain later. There was no wind. The leaves on the trees above me were completely still. I looked around the street to see if anyone else was outside. No one. The road behind me was empty. No cars, no footsteps, nothing. When I looked back at the light, it hadn't changed at all. I took a few slow steps forward. The gravel along the edge of the sidewalk crunched under my shoes. The light stayed in place. Now I was close enough to see that it wasn't casting any real shadow on the ground. The grass beneath it looked slightly brighter, but not the way it would under a normal light source. It felt like the glow wasn't coming from a single point, more like the air itself was lit. I stopped again. Something about it made me hesitate. Not fear exactly, just a strong sense that I shouldn't get too close. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, then I took one more step forward. The light moved. Not toward me, up. It lifted straight up from where it had been hovering. Smooth, silent, no acceleration, no jerk. Just a steady rise. I froze in place. The light climbed slowly between the two houses, passing above the roofline. For a second, it was visible against the darker sky, a small, pale sphere drifting upward. Then it kept going. Higher, higher, until it passed out of view above the rooftops. I stayed there, staring up at the empty space between the houses, waiting for it to come back down. It didn't. After a few seconds, the normal sounds of the street seemed to return. A distant car somewhere far off, the faint rustle of leaves overhead. I walked slowly toward the spot where the light had been. The grass there looked normal. No scorch marks, no signs of anything having been there. I crouched down and touched the ground. Cool, slightly damp from the evening air. Nothing unusual. I stood back up and looked up again. The sky was clear, a few stars visible between the branches. No light. I stayed there for another minute, half expecting something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I continued down the sidewalk toward my house. The rest of the walk felt normal, but I kept glancing back over my shoulder, just in case. When I reached my driveway, I turned one last time to look down the street. The space between the two houses was dark now, like it had always been. I went inside, locked the door, and set my keys on the counter. For a while, I just stood there in the kitchen, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Eventually, I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I picked up my phone and checked the time. 11:19 p.m. That made me pause. I was sure it had been around 11:05 when I first saw the light. The walk from there to my house should have taken maybe 5 minutes. I stood up and went to the window. From there, I could see the top of the street where the houses were. Everything looked normal. No lights, no movement. But as I stood there staring into the dark, I noticed something small. A faint glow just above the rooftops, not in the same place as before. Higher, much higher. It stayed there for a second, then it dimmed and disappeared. I was the last one to leave the construction site that night. We were pouring concrete for a new warehouse just outside town, and the crew had stayed late finishing a section of foundation before the temperature dropped too much. By the time everyone packed up and left, it was just me doing a final walk around to make sure the equipment was shut down. The place was quiet in that strange way construction sites get after dark. Huge open slabs of concrete, stacks of steel beams, and nothing but distant highway noise in the background. It was close to midnight. I remember looking up at the sky while I locked the tool trailer because the stars were unusually bright. Out there, with no buildings around yet, the whole sky felt wide open. That's when one of the stars started moving. At first, it looked like a satellite drifting slowly across the sky. I watched it casually while finishing the lock on the trailer door. But then the light stopped. Satellites don't stop. The point of light hung perfectly still above the unfinished building frame. I leaned back against the trailer and kept watching. A few seconds later, the light moved again, but not in a straight line. It slid sideways in a tight arc, like someone drawing a small circle in the sky. Then it stopped again. The movement was too precise, too controlled. I stepped out into the open part of the site where I had a better view of the sky. The light was lower now, still high above the steel framework, but definitely closer than it had been before. It didn't blink like an aircraft beacon. It stayed steady, bright white against the dark. Then something else caught my attention. The big tower crane at the center of the site had stopped moving. Earlier that evening, a light breeze had been slowly rotating the long arm of the crane. It's normal. The wind pushes it around when the brake isn't locked. But now the arm was perfectly still. The breeze was still blowing. I could feel it against my jacket, yet the crane hadn't moved an inch. The white light above the site dimmed slightly. Then the stars around it disappeared. That's when I realized I wasn't looking at a point of light anymore. Something huge was blocking the sky. A massive dark shape drifted silently above the steel skeleton of the warehouse. The faint white glow I'd been watching earlier now looked like a reflection sliding along its underside. I stepped backward without thinking. The thing was enormous, at least the width of the building frame, maybe wider. The shape was smooth and circular, almost perfectly flat along the bottom. The glow traced along the edge like a thin halo. As it moved overhead, the sound of the highway faded. Even the wind seemed to soften. Then my ears started ringing. It wasn't a loud sound, just a high-pitched pressure like standing near heavy machinery. The object slowed directly above the crane. For a moment, it hovered there. Then the glow beneath it brightened. The light wasn't a beam. It spread across the underside like something powering up. The crane's long arm twitched slightly. Just a small movement, but enough that I noticed. Then it stopped again. The pressure in my ears grew stronger. I could feel it in my jaw. The glow dimmed suddenly, and the object rose. Straight up, the movement was so smooth it barely looked real. Within seconds, it climbed higher than the crane's tower, higher than the temporary floodlights around the site. The white glow faded until the shape became just a darker patch against the stars. Then the stars filled back in behind it. The ringing in my ears stopped instantly. The crane arm creaked and rotated slightly in the wind again like nothing had happened. I stood there for another minute staring upward. Everything looked normal again. When I finally walked back to my truck and checked the time on the dashboard, it read 12:36. but I knew I'd started my final walk around at 12:12. Nearly 25 minutes had passed. I don't remember standing there that long. I only remember watching that light trace along the underside of something big enough to cover half the sky above an empty construction site. I noticed the wind turbines first. I was driving home along a rural highway that cuts through a wind farm about 20 miles outside town. It was late, around 1:15 in the morning, and the road was empty except for my truck and miles of blinking red lights from the turbines stretching across the hills. Normally, those turbines spin constantly. Even on calm nights, the blades move slowly because the wind never completely stops out there. But that night, every single one of them was still. The blades were frozen in place against the sky like giant black crosses. I slowed down a little, trying to figure out if I'd just never seen them shut down before. Maybe they stopped overnight for maintenance or something. But the strange thing wasn't just that they were still. It was the silence. The wind itself hadn't stopped. I could see the grass along the roadside moving in the headlights, but the turbines, hundreds of feet tall, weren't reacting to it at all. As I drove deeper into the wind farm, the red lights on the towers blinked normally, one after another across the hills. Then something brighter appeared beyond them. At first I thought it was a distant aircraft coming toward the turbines, but the light didn't move like a plane. It hovered low above the ridgeline behind the towers, glowing a soft white. I slowed the truck even more. The light was hard to focus on. It didn't flare like headlights or blink like aircraft lights. It just stayed steady, like a star that had somehow dropped down closer to the Earth. Then the turbines closest to it moved. Not spinning, turning. Each one rotated slightly on its base, the long blades shifting position as if the towers themselves were being pulled toward the light. I actually stopped the truck in the middle of the road. The turbines weren't built to move that way, without wind forcing the blades around, and even then, they spin, not twist their whole structure. But 3 of them slowly turned until their blades faced directly toward the hovering light. The rest of the turbines stayed frozen. The white glow brightened slightly. At the same moment, my truck's radio cut out. Not static, just silence. The dashboard lights dimmed briefly, then returned to normal. I stepped out of the truck without shutting off the engine. The air felt strange, thick and still, even though the grass continued moving in the breeze. My ears had that faint pressure feeling you get when descending in an airplane. The hovering light drifted sideways. As it moved, the 3 turbines that had rotated began turning again, slowly realigning themselves to follow it. It looked almost like they were tracking it. Then the glow dipped lower. For a second, I thought it was landing behind the ridge, but instead, it slid forward into clearer view between 2 towers. That's when I realized the light wasn't the object. It was reflecting off it. The thing itself was darker than the sky, a smooth oval shape that blocked out the stars behind it. The glow was just moonlight or starlight sliding across its surface. The object hovered maybe 100 feet above the ridge, completely silent. The pressure in my ears increased suddenly, sharp enough that I swallowed to clear it. The turbines that had been turning stopped again instantly. Then the object moved, straight up, not accelerating the way helicopters or drones do, just rising smoothly like gravity didn't matter to it. As it climbed, the glow around its edge brightened briefly, outlining the underside. I could see a faint circular pattern there, like rings etched into metal. Within seconds, it was above the height of the tallest turbines. Then it tilted slightly and vanished, not shooting off into the distance, just fading into the dark sky until the stars behind it reappeared. The pressure in my ears disappeared immediately. The radio inside the truck crackled back to life. Behind me, one of the turbines started spinning again with a low mechanical groan. Then another. Within a few seconds, the entire wind farm had returned to normal, the blades turning slowly in the night wind, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a minute longer, staring at the empty sky. When I finally got back into the truck, the dashboard clock caught my eye. It said 1:27 a.m. But I'd stopped on that road at 1:15. 12 minutes had passed, and I could have sworn the whole thing lasted maybe 2. I was flying my Cherokee back from a supply hop to Tonopah when I saw it. The sun had just dipped behind the mountains, that short window where everything turns orange and you lose depth perception for a few minutes. The winds were rougher than forecast, steady crosswind from the south, maybe 25 knots, enough that I had to fight the yoke just to keep level. I was about 40 miles west of Groom Lake airspace, still legal, still civilian. I'd flown the route dozens of times, usually uneventful. Nothing but desert, dry lake beds, and a long stretch of Highway 375 cutting through nowhere. Then, out of the corner of my eye, something caught the dying sunlight, except it didn't actually reflect anything. It just appeared as a darker patch against the sky, matte black, no shine, no edges catching the light. At first I thought it was a bird, maybe close enough to look bigger than it was. But as I glanced again, I realized it wasn't moving at all, just hanging there, perfectly still. At my altitude, with the wind the way it was, nothing should have been motionless. Not balloons, not drones, nothing. I steadied the plane and watched it for a second. The longer I looked, the more wrong it seemed. It didn't have a recognizable shape, more like a stretched oval, maybe 20 or 30 feet across, but the edges were hard to define. My eyes kept wanting to give it detail that wasn't there. I checked my instruments out of habit. Altimeter steady, heading steady, no alerts. Then I looked at the portable ADS-B display clipped to the panel. Nothing. No traffic. No restricted advisories. No blip that could have been the object. That wasn't impossible. Plenty of aircraft didn't broadcast on civilian frequencies. But even stealth aircraft usually showed something if they were close enough. This thing was maybe half a mile off my right wing. I keyed my mic. Niner 1 Bravo to Albuquerque Center. Do you have any traffic east of my position? A few seconds of static, then Niner 1 Bravo, negative. You are the only aircraft in that corridor. My stomach tightened. I banked slightly to the right, just a gentle turn to get a better angle. The object wasn't far below me, but not at my altitude either. Maybe a couple 100 feet beneath, hanging above a broad stretch of sand. As my nose swung toward it, the thing reacted. Not fast, not dramatic. It just tilted, like it was turning to face me. Except it didn't rotate like an aircraft would. The whole body seemed to shift orientation smoothly, without pivot points, without wings or tail or anything fixed. I felt a jolt of adrenaline hit my chest. I didn't bank any further. I leveled off and kept distance, hands tight on the yoke. Another glance at ADS-B, still nothing. Albuquerque Center, confirming no restricted ops ahead? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Affirmative, 1 Bravo, all clear, maintain heading. The matte black shape held still again, matching my direction, like it was observing. I'd never felt watched from the outside of my cockpit before. Not by another aircraft, not even by military traffic. This was different, hard to describe, just a feeling that it was paying attention. The wind buffeted the plane again, jolting the wings. My Cherokee pitched slightly before I corrected. The air was rough enough that anything suspended should have drifted or bobbed, but the object stayed fixed in place. No sway, no dip, no compensation, just perfect stillness. The last few rays of sunlight hit the desert floor, lighting the ground orange, but the object absorbed light instead of reflecting it, like a hole cut into the sky. I banked left to put some distance between us. Not a sharp turn, just enough to signal I wasn't approaching. The object didn't move for several seconds, then it rose, straight up, no acceleration curve, no visible thrust, no dust disturbed beneath it, no sound through my headset, no rumble through the airframe. One moment it hovered, the next moment it was dozens of feet higher. The next, hundreds, like a perfectly vertical elevator made of air. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe the dim light was messing with my depth perception. But the object continued rising, smooth, steady, impossible. At maybe 1,000 feet above its starting point, it paused again. The sunlight had nearly faded. The sky shifted toward dark blue. The object blended with the coming night, hard to track even when it was right in front of me. I forced myself to look away long enough to check my instruments again. Still nothing. My radio clicked suddenly, just a tiny burst of static, not unusual in rough terrain. But then I heard a faint tone in my headset, like 2 notes layered over each other. Not a voice, not interference I recognized. A sound that felt patterned, but not intentional. I tapped the side of the headset. Center, 1 Bravo. Radio check? Loud and clear. 1 Bravo. The tone cut out. I looked back toward the object. It had risen even higher, so high that I had to angle my neck to see it above the canopy. I banked away more sharply now, putting distance between us. I didn't care if it looked unprofessional. My heart was pounding. I wanted that thing out of sight. But before it vanished into the dark sky, it did one last thing. It shifted orientation again, tilting toward me or toward the path of my plane, like it was adjusting its attention. And then, without warning, it shot upward. Not fast like a jet, not streaking like a missile, just upward until it dissolved into the darkening sky. No trail, no light, no signature. Gone. I flew the rest of the route without speaking. My radio stayed clear. My instruments behaved normally. The winds eased as night took over, and everything went quiet in that eerie way the desert does after sunset. When I landed at the small airstrip back home, I asked the guy in the hangar, Tom, who'd been monitoring local traffic, whether he'd seen anything unusual. Nothing, he said. You were the only one up there. What about blips? Any radar anomalies? He shook his head. I thought about mentioning it, but stopped. I didn't have the right words. Nothing about what I saw fit anything that should have been in that airspace, civilian or military. Later that night, when I checked my GPS logs, I noticed a tiny gap, less than a second, during the moment the object rose vertically. A missing timestamp. Not enough to mean anything. Not enough to prove anything. But enough for me to notice. I kept replaying the way it faced me before it ascended. That slow, deliberate tilt. Like it recognized my presence. I've flown that route many times since. Same desert, same mountains, same dusk light, if I hit it right. I never saw anything like that again. But every time I pass the spot where it hovered, I feel myself tense without meaning to, waiting. I was stargazing from the backfield behind my cousin Lena's place in eastern Wyoming when it happened. Her house sat a good quarter-mile off the main road, surrounded by tall grass and open sky. I'd gone out there to help her mend some fencing, and after dinner, I wandered outside with a blanket and a thermos, just wanting to unwind. It was one of those dry, chilly nights where the air feels thin and the stars look close enough to touch. I lay down on the blanket and let my eyes adjust. The sky was packed with stars, more than I ever saw back home in the city. The Milky Way was a pale band stretching across everything, and for a while that was all I focused on. Nothing strange, nothing out of the ordinary. Just a quiet night. I don't know how long I'd been watching before I noticed the pulsing. A single star, a little to the right of center, brightened and dimmed in a steady rhythm. Not twinkling, stars always twinkle, but pulsing. A slow, even beat. Bright, dim, bright, dim. Exactly the same interval each time. I sat up slightly, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Sometimes when you stare too long, your vision glitches. So I blinked hard and looked away for a moment. When I looked back, the star was still doing it. Same rhythm, same intensity. I tried to find another star doing something similar so I could chalk it up to the atmosphere, but everything else looked normal. Steady flicker from distant turbulence, nothing unusual. Only that one star pulsed. I watched it for maybe a full minute. The rhythm didn't change. I even counted along under my breath. Each pulse was a little over a second apart. Too exact to be random refraction. A breeze moved through the grass beside me. Then it stopped almost immediately, as if someone had turned off a fan. The air became completely still. Even the insects in the grass quieted down. The pulsing continued. Bright, dim. Bright, dim. I reached for my phone. The moment my hand touched it, before I even unlocked it, the pulsing star went still. It didn't fade or blink out. It just stopped pulsing and joined the rest of the sky, indistinguishable from the stars around it. I froze with my thumb on the screen. I waited 10 seconds. Nothing happened. I set the phone down on the blanket, keeping my eyes on the same spot. Another 10 seconds. Still nothing. I felt a weird tension building in the air, like the quiet had weight to it. The insects still weren't making noise. The breeze didn't pick back up. Even the distant highway, usually a soft hum, sounded muted. I lay back down slowly. Almost immediately, the star pulsed again. One soft throb of light, then another. Same rhythm, same brightness changes, like it had waited for me to settle before starting again. My throat tightened a little. I told myself it had to be some kind of atmospheric distortion, maybe a satellite. Maybe something else that would make sense if I Googled it, but nothing about its behavior matched anything I knew. I lifted my hand toward my phone, not touching it this time, just reaching. The star stopped again, instantly, not gradually, as if someone had flipped a switch. I lowered my hand. The star stayed still, ordinary. I waited. A full 30 seconds passed before it pulsed again. One slow, steady beat, then another, as if resuming right where it had left off. A knot formed in my stomach. I tested it again, slowly raising my hand an inch or two. The star froze mid-pulse. The brightness held exactly where it was, unmoving. I lowered my hand, 25 seconds this time before it resumed. Bright, dim, bright, dim. The silence around me deepened. I don't know how else to describe it. It felt like the night itself was aware of me noticing something I wasn't supposed to notice. My phone buzzed suddenly on the blanket. I jumped. When I looked, there was no notification. The screen had lit up on its own for a brief second, then gone dark again. When I looked back at the sky, the pulsing had stopped. Not paused. Stopped. The star remained steady like all the others. Not a trace of the rhythmic brightening left. I kept watching, waiting for one more pulse. One hint that I hadn't imagined all of it. It didn't return. The insects started chirping again a few minutes later. The breeze picked up. A truck rolled by on the highway, normal as ever. Everything slipped back into a comfortable, familiar quiet. I stayed out there longer than I needed to, partly hoping it would start again, and partly hoping it wouldn't. The star never pulsed again that night. When I finally went inside, Lena asked if I'd been stargazing the whole time and joked that I'd probably fall asleep out there. I didn't mention what I'd seen. Later, lying in the guest room, I opened the star map app on my phone and tried to figure out which star it had been, but my memory of its exact position felt fuzzier than it should have been. I couldn't match it to anything confidently. The next night, I went back out to the same spot. The stars looked normal, all of them. Normal distance, normal shimmer, nothing pulsing, nothing reacting. I noticed him the first time because he was sitting in the wrong place. I worked the front desk at a small outpatient clinic in Mesa, Arizona. Nothing dramatic. Beige walls, bad art, the smell of disinfectant, and burnt coffee. Patients checked in, sat down, stared at their phones, got called back. The lobby had a very obvious flow to it. If you were waiting, you sat facing the TV or the windows. The chairs by the elevator were technically for overflow, but no one ever used them unless the place was packed. It was around 8:15 in the morning, already hot outside, that dry desert heat that felt wrong before noon. I was logging someone into the system when I looked up and saw a man sitting in one of the elevator chairs. Just one chair pulled slightly away from the others, angled so he could see straight down the hall. He wasn't looking at the TV. He wasn't on his phone. He was watching the elevator doors. I remember thinking maybe he was early for an appointment upstairs. That happened sometimes, but usually people hovered near the call button or stood. They didn't sit like they were settling in for a long wait. He looked normal enough at a glance, mid-30s maybe. Dark hair cut short, clean-shaven, plain gray button-up shirt, dark pants, no jacket, no bag. His hands were folded loosely in his lap. After a few minutes, it started to bother me that he hadn't checked in. We had a sign-in tablet right on the counter. Big and obvious. People missed it sometimes, but not for that long. I finished with the patient in front of me and called out, "Sir, if you're here for an appointment, you'll need to sign in." He didn't react. Not even a flicker. Didn't turn his head. Didn't shift. Nothing. Just kept staring at the elevator doors like he was waiting for them to open on their own. I thought maybe he had headphones in, but I couldn't see any. I tried again, a little louder. Still nothing. That's when I really looked at him. His eyes were open, but not focused on anything specific. They tracked the elevator panel when the light above it flicked on for another floor, then went back to the seam between the doors. A patient came out of the elevator then, and the doors opened right in front of him. He leaned back slightly to give them space, but didn't look at the person. The doors closed again, and he leaned forward to his original position. I didn't push it. I told myself he was waiting for someone. Or maybe he was confused. We got a lot of confused people. Around 9:30, he stood up and walked out. I didn't see him sign out. I didn't hear the door. One second he was there, the next time I glanced over, the chair was empty. The second day, he was there when I arrived. Same chair, same posture, same clothes. It was 7:55 a.m. The lobby had just opened. Thogras, no patients yet, just me, the cleaning crew finishing up, and him. I stopped just inside the door and stood there longer than I should have, watching him. He was already staring at the elevator. I asked the cleaner, Rosa, if she'd seen him come in. She frowned and said, "Who?" I pointed. She looked where I was pointing and then back at me. "Girl," she said quietly, "there's no one there." I looked again. He was still there, still watching. I laughed it off, embarrassed, and said, "Never mind." Rosa left a few minutes later, shaking her head like I was messing with her. I watched him for most of the morning. He never moved except to adjust slightly when the elevator opened. Never checked his phone. Never spoke. Never signed in. At one point, a kid started crying in the lobby, loud and sudden. Everyone jumped. He didn't. I finally called security around 10. Just asked them to send someone to check on a guy who might be lost or having a medical issue. While I was on the phone, I glanced over again. The chair was empty. Security came anyway, walked the lobby, checked the bathrooms, shrugged, asked for a description. When I described him, the guard frowned and said no one matching that had come through. The third day, I told myself I wouldn't look. I failed about 30 seconds after sitting down. He was back. Same spot. Same clothes. Same stillness. This time, the air conditioning felt too loud. Every sound felt like it echoed. I couldn't stop thinking about Rosa not seeing him, or how security hadn't seen him leave. I didn't call out to him. I didn't call security. I just watched. Around noon, one of the nurses, Kyle, came up to the desk and followed my gaze. "You keep staring at that chair," he said. "Do you see him?" I asked. "See who?" My stomach dropped. I didn't answer. I just shook my head. He left again sometime in the afternoon. I didn't notice him go. I just realized at some point that the chair was empty. That night, I asked our office manager if we could pull the lobby cameras. I said a patient had complained about someone making them uncomfortable. She agreed. We sat in her office after closing, the desert sky outside already dark and cooling fast. We scrubbed through 3 days of footage. The lobby was empty every morning until patients arrived. The chairs by the elevator were always empty. No man, no movement, no sign of anyone sitting there. On the third day's footage, I watched myself stare at an empty chair for hours. I didn't come in the next day. I called out sick and stayed home, curtains drawn, trying not to picture that chair. When I went back the day after that, the chairs by the elevator were gone. Facilities said they'd been removed months ago. No one remembered them being there at all. The elevator still opened and closed. I stopped watching it. I was walking home from the grocery store around 11:20 on a Tuesday night. I live out on the edge of town in Ashwood, Oregon. Small place, lots of straight roads, fields that go on for miles once you get past the last block of houses. I had just finished unloading the bags into the fridge and realized I forgot something, so I grabbed my jacket and headed back out. It was cool for September, maybe mid-50s, clear sky, and the street was empty. I cut through the vacant lot behind my house instead of taking the sidewalk. I like that because it shaves off a couple minutes, and at night it's usually quieter anyway. My phone was in my pocket playing a podcast at low volume, something about old unsolved mysteries, but I turned it off when I stepped into the lot because I like hearing the night sounds. Crickets, frogs in the ditch, distant cars once in a while. Normal quiet stuff. I was about halfway across when everything just stopped. 1 second, there was the usual buzzing of insects and the soft swish of the wind in the tall grass. The next, it was like someone hit a mute button. Nothing. No insects, no wind, no gravel crunch under my boots. Just silence so deep it felt like pressure on my ears. I stopped walking because it felt wrong, like the night had abruptly paused. I looked around and the darkness seemed heavier, thicker. That's when I saw it. A dim light far above me, high up over the field, maybe a couple 100 feet up. It wasn't bright like a spotlight or a flash. It was more like a pale glow, just hovering there at first. I thought it might be a plane's navigation light, but it didn't blink. It just stayed constant, steady, like a small star that had somehow drifted closer. I nudged my head a little left and right, trying to get a better look. It didn't change or flicker. It just drifted slowly, sideways like it was being carried by a wind I couldn't feel. The grass around me was still. The trees weren't moving, not even a whisper of breeze. The eerie thing was the silence. It felt like the world had gone quiet on purpose. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. I realized I wasn't even hearing the blood flow through my veins for a moment. Just this uncanny stillness. I didn't dare step forward or back. I just watched that light drift maybe 30 degrees across the sky, slow and almost deliberate. Maybe 15 seconds passed before I noticed another odd detail. The temperature felt slightly different. Not colder or warmer exactly. More like the air went flat, like someone turned off the dynamics of the night itself. It was such a subtle thing that if you weren't paying attention, you'd never register it. But I felt it. That was what made my skin crawl a bit. Not fear, exactly, but